Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you fall asleep. So before you get settled in, I'd love for you to leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. When I was around 6 or 7, my family lived in a modest farmhouse just outside of a small town called Pine Hill in upstate New York. It was the early 1970s, and my siblings and I spent our days running wild through the woods, playing hide and seek in the overgrown backyard, and occasionally finding ourselves in situations that left us both mesmerized and terrified. The house had a basement, and my older brother Mike and I shared the larger of 2 bedrooms down there. We called it the Big Room, a name that made it sound a little grander than it really was, but it had the space we needed for all our games and late-night talks. Our room was at the far end of the basement, far from the stairs, which gave it a bit of an isolated feel. But we didn't mind. It felt like our little corner of the world. One chilly winter evening, as the wind howled outside, Mike and I were playing in the big room when we heard something strange. It started as a soft scraping sound, like wood dragging across the old, creaky floorboards in the unfinished side of the basement. We both paused, exchanging confused glances, but continued playing, assuming it was just the house settling. Then we heard it again. Don't, a hollow, rhythmic sound, as if a chair leg was tapping against the floor. We thought it was our younger brother Jake, who was about 3 years younger than me. He often liked to play near the stairwell where we kept the extra chairs, but he was hesitant to cross the dark, unfinished part of the basement. We figured he was shifting one of the chairs, trying to decide whether or not to join us. "Jake, we're in the big room," we called out, but there was no reply. The sound grew louder, more distinct, like a chair being dragged, rocked, and bumped across the floor. "Jake," we called again, but still nothing. Our curiosity quickly turned into concern, so we decided to check on him. As we walked through the basement, the noise became frantic. It sounded like the chair was being pushed, scraping and bumping, moving with more force than before. Jake must be pushing it around, we thought. But when we reached the stairs, there was no sign of him. The noises, though, were unmistakable. They were coming from behind the door at the bottom of the stairs. Sure that Jake was hiding behind it, we quickly pulled the door open. What we saw stopped us dead in our tracks. There in the storage area was the chair, but it wasn't just shifting gently. It was violently scraping, rocking, and bouncing on the floor, as though an invisible force was making it move. Without a second thought, Mike and I bolted up the stairs, our hearts racing. In the living room, we found Jake sitting calmly on the couch, watching a football game with Dad. He hadn't been anywhere near the basement. Out of breath, we tried to explain what had happened, but Dad didn't seem too concerned. He just told us to remember to turn off the basement lights before heading to bed. Too scared to go back alone, Mike and I ventured down together. The basement was eerily silent, but the memory of the chair moving on its own made every shadow feel alive. We quickly switched off the lights in the big room and rushed back upstairs, not daring to glance at the chair again. After that night, the chair problem, as we called it, never occurred again. The chairs eventually became part of my adult life when I inherited them after the family moved out. Over the years, most of them broke and ended up in the fire pit, but one remains in my basement to this day. It's been quiet ever since. The only other strange thing I remember from that house involved Jake. When he was older and moved into the smaller basement bedroom, he began to insist that something was coming into his room through the walls. My mom, trying to reassure him, asked how monsters could get through solid walls. He looked around at the outlets and said with eerie certainty, "They come through there." Thankfully, he doesn't remember it now. When I visited Pine Hill last year, I noticed the house had been torn down and replaced with a new one. But the memories of that old farmhouse and the unsettling things that happened inside it still linger in my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the house's new owners will experience anything strange of their own. This happened to me and my ex-best friend in the fall of 2006. We lived above a small diner in a quiet town on the outskirts of Pine Lake, a place that always seemed to have an eerie vibe. Strange things seemed to happen frequently there, like power outages or the water pipes freezing up, even when every other building on the street was perfectly fine. At first, I didn't think much of it, but what I experienced in that apartment is something I'll never forget. At the time, I had just started dating my now boyfriend, and I was spending most of my nights at his place. One morning, around 7 or 8 a.m., I came home before he left for work. My friend Emily was still in bed, but heard me come in and called me over to sit with her. She told me about hearing footsteps on the roof the night before, like someone was running back and forth. She even called the sheriff's department, but they didn't find anything. I brushed it off, thinking she must have been imagining things. That night, my boyfriend was out with his friends, so I stayed home. I had no idea it would be a night I'd never forget. It all began when I was sitting in the living room. Tiny sparks of light started darting around the room, quick and sharp, like little bursts of static. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but when I asked Emily, she saw them too. They stung lightly when they touched me, like tiny electric shocks. The lights followed me as I moved to the next room, and I started to feel uneasy, though I tried to shake it off. To distract ourselves, we decided to play some music. That's when things took a terrifying turn. We put on a CD, Rihanna's SOS. At first, everything was fine, but then the song slowed down, like a record playing at the wrong speed. Suddenly, a high-pitched, childlike noise came from the CD player. It wasn't quite a scream, but more like something trying to communicate. I froze, but Emily ran to the player, panicked, and tried to turn it off. In her rush, she kicked it, breaking it completely. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, and it chilled me to the bone. Things grew even stranger after that. We started noticing markings on the walls, things we'd seen when we first moved in but hadn't thought much about. Now, the marks were taking on clear shapes, crosses, a figure of a man standing by a graveyard, and other unsettling images. My bedroom, which had always made me uncomfortable, seemed to be the epicenter. I never unpacked or even set up my bed properly. I just couldn't bring myself to settle in there. The hallway was the most disturbing part. A large, shark-like figure seemed to move along the walls, its mouth wide open, growing smaller as it swam down the hall. You could even feel the raised bumps where the eyes had been drawn. Behind the front door, there were marks of a man hanging, and the doorknob seemed to serve as a noose. But the most haunting figure of all was a man in a black cowboy hat. His face was hidden beneath the brim, but his chilling smile was unmistakable. His image appeared everywhere in the house, but the most terrifying drawing was outside Emily's bedroom. It looked like a comic book etched into the wall, taller than either of us. The sequence showed the man walking down the hallway, holding a gun. In the next frame, a body was lying on the floor as he pointed the gun at it. The final frame was a close-up of his face, his hat low, that sinister smile spread wide. I can still see it so clearly in my mind. The house felt alive with something dark. We'd hear running footsteps in the hallway and feel the bed dip as if someone had jumped onto it, though no one was there. Instead of black marks on the walls, there were white fingerprints above the doors. It felt like something terrible had happened in that place, something that left a stain behind. When I was about 10 years old, something happened that I've tried to forget for years. It happened in a small town in the Midwest, where my relatives still live in the same house to this day. At the time, my aunt and uncle had just moved into a charming old Victorian house on the edge of town. It was a grand, beautiful place, full of character, but a little worn from age. The house sat near an old, abandoned school for children with special needs, and we later found out that the school had once been a retirement home many years ago. Across the street was a newer nursing home, a place my aunt and uncle had always found a bit eerie, but never gave much thought to. A few months after they moved in, my family came to visit. My two younger cousins and I were playing in one of their bedrooms when I left to grab a drink. When I came back, I saw my cousin sitting on the floor, playing with his toys, while an elderly woman, probably in her 90s, sat on the bed, quietly watching him. She looked completely normal. Nothing about her seemed out of place at first. I assumed she was a relative I didn't know who had wandered into the room while I was gone. For about 15 or 20 minutes, she sat there, occasionally mumbling to herself or talking as if to someone who wasn't in the room. Neither of us said anything about her presence. I figured my cousin knew who she was, and he probably thought the same about me. But after a while, her silent watching started to make me uncomfortable, so I decided to speak to her. When I turned to face her, though, she was gone. I didn't think too much of it at the time. The room was big, and she could have slipped out without me noticing. Months passed, and I didn't visit again for a while. But one day, at a family gathering, my cousin told me something unsettling. He said the old woman often appeared in his room or the bathroom and would ask about me. She always wanted to know where the little blonde girl was, and she said I reminded her of herself when she was a child. I found this strange. Why wouldn't she just ask my aunt or uncle about me? About a year later, I visited the house again. My younger cousin ran up to me, excited, and told me someone wanted to see me. I followed him into his room, not expecting anything out of the ordinary. But there she was again. This time, her appearance was even more unsettling. She looked much paler than I remembered, and the room had a strange smell, like mildew or something decaying. At first, I thought my cousin was playing a prank, but then the reality of the situation hit me. He continued playing with his toys as if nothing was wrong, while the woman sat on the bed, staring at me with a soft smile. I finally found the courage to speak and asked her where she was from. She just gestured vaguely, not pointing to anything in particular. I asked if she came from the nursing home across the street, but she shook her head. When I turned to look at my cousin, I turned back to the woman, and she was gone. I asked my cousin if he had heard her speak, but he just shrugged and said the lady had asked him to call me to his room. That was the last time I saw her. A few years later, my cousin shared something strange that happened to him. He had been half asleep when he heard a woman's voice saying, "You kids have grown up now. You used to wear me out, walking all the way from the home to see you." He asked my aunt who the woman might have been, and she understandably freaked out. To this day, my relatives still live in that house, and they say nothing strange has happened since. But for me, I'm too scared to go back or even bring it up with my family. Last year, my cousin mentioned it again, and I could feel the chill run down my spine. She wasn't exactly scary, just odd, and although she never really spoke to me, I'll never forget her quiet smile as she watched us play. For as long as I can remember, I've been able to see and hear things that others can't explain. Every home I've lived in has had some sort of strange activity, ghosts, unexplained noises, or an unsettling feeling in the air. But this house, the one I moved into just a few months ago, feels different. It feels darker, heavier, and somehow far more dangerous. The strange happenings began almost immediately. I always feel like I'm being watched, except when I'm in the bathroom. Thankfully, that seems to be the one place I'm left alone. But my room? It's always freezing, no matter how many heaters I use. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw a shadowy figure standing in the guest room, just outside my bedroom door. Even in the dim light, I recognized it. It was the same dark shape I'd seen standing over me in my last house. I froze. It started moving closer, and the air became thick with the unmistakable smell of decay. I could hear it breathing, slow, labored, and whispering something I couldn't make out. My fear rooted me to the spot until it stood right in front of me. That's when I finally snapped out of it and ran to wake my dad. Thankfully, things settled down after that, for a little while. Then I hurt myself and had to stay home from work for a couple of weeks. That's when the activity really started to escalate. At night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I would hear faint noises, like the sounds of a distant party, people talking and laughing. But every time I went to check, the house would be silent. My dog, Max, started acting strange too. He'd bark at my bedroom door for no reason and run in circles around the house, like something was chasing him. One night when my dad was out, I was in the office getting up to grab a drink. I heard a door creak open behind me, but didn't think much of it. When I tried to leave, the door wouldn't budge. At first, I thought it was just stuck. It is an old house after all. But then the room grew icy cold, and I heard a door slam somewhere else in the house. Panic set in as I realized I couldn't open the windows either. That's when I heard a voice, faint and cold, whispering, "Welcome home." The blinds began to sway, but there was no breeze. I hid under the desk until everything calmed down. The next morning, my dad was furious. His guitar strings had been sliced clean through, and his room was in complete disarray. I couldn't explain what had happened, and Max certainly wasn't to blame. So I took the heat, knowing the truth would sound ridiculous. Things took a darker turn when my grandmother came to visit. She stepped inside the house, but only for a few seconds before she pulled me outside. She told me there was a man in the house, and he had bad intentions. A little girl was with him. I trusted her. My grandmother has always been sensitive to these things, even more than I am. Since that day, I've been sleeping with the light on, but 2 nights ago, everything reached a breaking point. My dad insisted I turn the light off to save on the electricity bill. Reluctantly, I did. Not long after, my bed began to shake violently, like an earthquake. It lasted for about 15 seconds before I was yanked from the bed and slammed into the wall. I couldn't breathe, whether from the impact or something else. The dark figure was back, and this time, the little girl was with him. She looked at me with those sad, apologetic eyes as the man knelt beside me. He whispered, "Welcome's over," or something close to that, before he vanished. The girl stayed. I've seen her many times throughout my life, and I know she means no harm. Her presence calmed me just enough to crawl back into bed, even though I was still terrified. I know this all sounds impossible, but it's my reality. The older I get, the more vivid these encounters become. It's not just in my house anymore. I see things everywhere, even at my friends' houses. What do you think happens next? Have you ever experienced something similar? It all happened at an old farmhouse in a remote part of the Pacific Northwest, tucked away in the shadow of the dense forests near a small town called Pine Hollow. The house had stood for over a century, originally built by a local family known for their ties to the town's early history. Their legacy included stories of helping neighbors during difficult times, but the house itself had a reputation that carried whispers of something more, unsettling. Over the years, it had become a popular vacation spot for those wanting to escape the hustle of city life. I'd visited several times before, but it was on my last stay several years ago that something happened that I could never quite explain. Anyone who's spent time in the quiet countryside knows how incredibly dark it can get at night. Nothing like the light pollution of the city. It's the kind of darkness that feels almost heavy, wrapping around you like a blanket. The farmhouse, with its creaky floors and old wooden beams, was the perfect place to play hide and seek in the dark. Laugh all you want, but trust me, it's thrilling. That night, I was the seeker. My search led me to the master bedroom, which had a small fire crackling in the opposite room. The dim light from the fire barely illuminated the space. As I stepped in, everything froze. In front of me, out of nowhere, something appeared, a mass of pure blackness, like a shadow that had a life of its own. It didn't look solid in any real sense. It had no clear shape, constantly shifting and warping as my eyes tried to focus. The most unsettling thing about it was how dark it was, like the darkness itself had taken on form. It absorbed every ounce of light, even the faint glow from the fire behind me. The room around me remained visible, but this thing was a void, a complete absence where the rest of the world still existed. And then, something even stranger happened. A deep, dark red light flickered to life, just where I imagined its right eye might be. It began as a faint ember, growing brighter, slowly cutting through the surrounding blackness. Oddly, I didn't feel terrified, just confused. The only emotion I could grasp was a kind of disbelief. The air around me was thick with tension, but some primal part of me told me not to go any closer. I slowly backed away, and as I did, the red glow dimmed, and the figure disappeared entirely. After a long search of the house, I eventually found all the other hiders except one. I had to return to that room. This time, there was nothing. No dark figure, no glowing red eye. It looked just like any other room, except for the creaking floorboards and the clutter that always filled it. I soon found the last hider perched on top of the wardrobe, looking pleased with himself. I couldn't help myself. I had to ask, "Were you up there the whole time?" He nodded, but I knew something didn't add up. The wardrobe was high, and the house was old. Each step on the creaky floorboards was impossible to make without being heard. There was no way he could have gotten up there without making a noise. The house groaned with every movement, and I would have heard him. To this day, I still don't know what I saw that night, but I've never really wanted to know either. It wasn't just a trick of the light, and it wasn't my imagination. Whatever it was something beyond me. It's one of those things I've never been able to shake, and while I may never understand it, it makes for a good story around a campfire. And now, I'm sharing it with you. Let me share a personal story with you that has always intrigued me. It's an experience that still lingers in my mind, and I think you'll find it just as fascinating as I did. My high school was an old building, steeped in history and surrounded by stories of things that went bump in the night. If you've ever heard of tales of haunted American schools or old, eerie campuses, you'll know the kind of vibe I'm talking about. This school had its fair share of legends. One of the most famous stories was about the lady in white, who supposedly wandered the old football field late at night. The principal, a man known for his practicality and no-nonsense attitude, even admitted he'd seen her more than once. The story goes that she was a student from long ago who took her own life after an affair with a local farm boy led to a scandal. Whether that's true or not, I couldn't say. Then there was the story about the old chapel at the edge of the campus. It had been the site of an old graveyard, and when they rebuilt part of the campus, they discovered several unmarked graves underneath the chapel. Ever since, students and staff have reported hearing faint whispers and the sound of footsteps echoing late at night when no one's around. But my encounter, it wasn't with any of these. Mine was something different. I remember my drama teacher, Mr. Thompson, had a name for it. He called her Lucinda, after a character from an old ghost story he'd read. Whenever he would leave the theater late at night, he would always say, "Good night, Lucinda," before locking up. It became his little tradition. The theater itself was small, a place filled with creaky floors and heavy curtains. The teacher's office overlooked the stage, and on more than one occasion, staff who stayed late would hear strange noises coming from backstage. Sometimes it sounded like footsteps, other times it was a faint, sorrowful cry. Whenever anyone went to check, the sound would stop, but as soon as they turned to leave, it would start up again. One night, Mr. Thompson himself saw something. A shadow darting past the stage door just after he'd forgotten to keep the lights on. He never spoke of it much, but I could tell from the way his voice shook that he was rattled. Now, my own experience happened in 2005. I was 17, preparing for a school play, and I had a lead role. This meant plenty of weekend rehearsals. One Saturday afternoon, it was just 4 of us in the building, practicing on a cold, rainy day. The school was nestled on a hill, and winters there were bitterly cold. We sometimes even got a light dusting of snow, though that was rare in our part of the country. During one scene I wasn't needed for, I was waiting backstage in a small, dark dressing room. The space was cramped and filled with old costumes and props. It had no lights, so it was pitch black in there, save for a faint glow from the hallway. To kill time, I sat on an old stool, trying to relax. After a while, I must have dozed off. I woke up suddenly, feeling an intense cold rush through the room. It wasn't just chilly, it was freezing, like something had sucked the warmth out of the air. It was so sudden, I couldn't shake the unease that followed. And then, without warning, I knew she was there. I can't explain how, but I was absolutely certain. She felt like a woman, like she was hovering in the far corner of the room behind me, watching, but not threatening. For a split second, it almost felt normal, like she belonged there. But then, I felt a chill run through me, and I jumped up, bolting out of that room without a second thought. That wasn't the only time I felt her presence. During one of the performances, as I was waiting backstage again, I had the same overwhelming sense that someone else was in the room with me. It was the kind of feeling where you know, deep down, you're not alone. I'm not usually one to believe in things like that. I'm not the type who's sensitive to the paranormal. But this was different. There was no malice in her presence, just a strange kind of curiosity. It wasn't menacing, but it was undeniable. The only proof I had was the sudden drop in temperature and that strange, unexplained feeling that someone was there. While that may not sound like solid evidence, the school's history and all the other stories made me feel like I wasn't just imagining things. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? This story isn't just mine. It's something that shook both me and my cousin to the core. It all started one evening, and what we experienced still haunts me. Here's what happened. It was a Saturday night in early September 2012. My parents were out for the evening, attending a neighbor's barbecue. A typical suburban get-together that's fun for the kids but dull for anyone else. So my cousin Jake and I were left to house sit for my grandma, who lived in a quiet house on the edge of town. She was out visiting friends for the weekend, and we had the place all to ourselves. By 7 p.m., we had settled into the living room, flipping through channels. Grandma had cable, so we figured we'd kill time watching TV until they all returned around 10. The first odd thing happened when the phone rang. I answered, but the line was dead. I sighed, muttering to myself, "Damn pranksters." "What's up?" Jake asked from the couch, his eyes still glued to the screen. "No one," I said, brushing it off. "Just a prank call." I shrugged it off and went to make dinner. Just some instant ramen. Simple enough, right? But as we ate, the phone rang again. I stood up to answer it, but just as I reached for the receiver, it stopped. I sat back down, frustrated, and we continued eating in silence. By 8 p.m., the boredom was setting in. "Man, you should have brought your Xbox," Jake teased. "You should have brought your Switch," I shot back with a laugh. We flicked through channels for a while, landing on a movie that wasn't too bad. But just as we were getting into it, the phone rang once more. I stood up again, groaning, "If this is another prank, I swear I'm tracking the number down." I grabbed the phone. "Hello?" No answer, just breathing. Slow, deliberate, almost as if someone was listening. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. Jake, noticing the change in my tone, sat up. "What is it?" I stayed silent, but I started making random noises into the phone, hoping to annoy whoever was on the other end. They hung up, but not for long. The phone rang again, and this time I felt a chill. "Seriously?" I yelled. Jake burst into laughter, and I answered the call again. This time, all I could hear was loud, manic laughter, hysterical, echoing. My skin crawled. Instinctively, I mimicked the laugh, trying to make light of the situation. But then I remembered the urban legend, the one about the babysitter who kept getting prank calls, only to discover the caller was inside the house. My stomach twisted. I hung up quickly and turned to Jake. "I think someone's in the house." Jake gave me a nervous laugh. "What? No way." "Just play along," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's go outside. We'll figure it out from there." We decided to leave, telling ourselves we'd step outside for a moment, an excuse to get away from the house, despite neither of us smoking. "You coming?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I want candy," Jake replied, his voice tight. We locked the door behind us, but as soon as we did, we heard a loud thump inside the house. Without thinking, we bolted to my car. My hands were shaking as I tried to get the key in the ignition, but after what felt like forever, the engine roared to life. I floored it, speeding away. At the store, Jake asked, "Do you think we should call the cops or?" "I don't know," I interrupted. "It's probably nothing. Let's go back." but we'll stay outside. Keep an eye on things." We drove back to the neighborhood and parked a little down the road, trying to stay out of sight. But then I saw it. "Did you leave a light on upstairs?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound. "No," Jake replied, his voice shaky. "But doesn't your little brother, Max, have that automatic nightlight?" I relaxed for a moment. "Right, that's it." But as I reached for the door handle, Jake suddenly shouted, "Wait, start the car. Let's go now." Before I could even ask why, Jake said, "I saw someone move across the upstairs window." His words froze me in place. A chill crept down my spine. I started the car without another word, and we drove straight to Jake's house. As we went, I decided to call the phone company to check the log. To my confusion, there were no incoming or outgoing calls logged from my grandma's house during that time. We told my mom and uncle what had happened. They instructed us to stay where we were, and they'd come back to check things out. We parked a few houses away from my grandma's and waited. I kept my eyes on the house, and then I saw it too. A shadow moved across the upstairs window. I was frozen, my hands trembling on the wheel. When my uncle finally arrived, I felt a huge sense of relief. I explained everything to him, and not long after, the police showed up, 5 officers in total. 4 of them went inside to search while 1 stayed with us. The wait felt like an eternity. Eventually, they came back outside. "Did anyone leave a window open?" one of the officers asked. "No," we all said in unison. My uncle called my aunt, who confirmed that she hadn't left anything open either. The officers reported no signs of forced entry, but when I mentioned the phone calls, they exchanged uneasy glances. I spoke to the operator, I said. They confirmed no calls were logged. The officers contacted the phone company, who also confirmed the same. Then, during their second sweep of the house, they found something strange, a half-eaten sandwich under the dining room table. "We didn't eat anything like that," I explained. The look on everyone's face shifted, concern deepening. They decided to keep watch over the house for the rest of the night, but nothing else happened. So, what was it? A prank? Something supernatural? Or maybe a disturbed person trying to turn an urban legend into reality? I'll never know. But the lack of any call records still sends a chill down my spine. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I live in a small town in Florida, about 20 minutes from the coast. It was about 8 years ago when my grandmother decided she wanted to be closer to us, so she bought the house right next door. I was only 6 or 7 at the time. The house had 4 bedrooms, split across 2 wings. The main bedroom and another room were down a small hallway, while the other 2 rooms branched off from the living room. Whenever my parents went out of town, I'd stay with my grandmother, but I never liked sleeping there. That bedroom always made me feel uneasy. I'd beg her to let me sleep on the couch instead. At first, she'd agree, but eventually, she'd move me back to the bedroom once she thought I was asleep. No matter how exhausted I was, I could never sleep properly in that room. I'd lie awake all night, waiting for the first light of day. One night, though, I did manage to drift off, only to wake up suddenly, wide-eyed and startled. I wasn't sure what had woken me, but when I turned toward the doorway, I froze. There, standing in the frame, was the shadowy figure of a tall, thin man. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. I was paralyzed with fear. Pulling the blankets over my head, I stayed that way, too afraid to move, until the overwhelming exhaustion pulled me back into a fitful sleep. Years passed, and my grandmother eventually moved in with us. I convinced myself that what I saw that night had just been my imagination. I didn't think about it for years, until my cousin came to stay with us. She's 27 now, and had once stayed at my grandmother's old house too. During a casual conversation about ghosts and strange experiences, she brought up the house and shared something that made my blood run cold. She told me she had slept in the main bedroom while visiting. One night, she woke up needing to use the bathroom. She didn't like the en-suite bathroom connected to the room. It always felt off, so she decided to walk down the hallway to use the other bathroom. On her way back to bed, she thought she heard someone shuffling behind her. She turned, but there was no one there. Shaking it off, she went back to her room and climbed into bed. But as she lay there, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Turning onto her back, she gasped when she saw someone standing at the foot of her bed. At first, she thought it was her mother, who had been woken by her movements. "Sorry if I woke you," she said, but the figure didn't answer. Squinting through the darkness, she realized it wasn't her mother, or my grandmother. It was someone else entirely. Terrified, she pulled the covers over her head and screamed. My grandmother and her mother rushed into the room moments later. The bedroom was empty. Convinced there had been an intruder, they searched the entire house, checking every door and window. But they found nothing, no signs of forced entry. After hearing her story, I asked her to describe what she had seen. She said it was a tall, thin man. That's when I told her about what I had seen as a child. Later, I shared both our experiences with my mother. That's when she told me something chilling. A man had once taken his life in the garage of my grandmother's old house. I never told my cousin about that part. My mom thought it would scare her too much. Looking back, I don't think the ghost meant us harm. I think he was just trying to make his presence known. It was August 12, 2000, a calm evening, and we all knew what was coming. The call we had been waiting for arrived at 9 p.m. "She's gone," the nurse said gently. My mother had passed peacefully, with a kind nurse at her side. At least she wasn't alone in her final moments. Earlier that year in May, Mom had been diagnosed with cancer. By the time the doctors discovered it, the cancer had already spread throughout her body, its origin still a mystery. It had ravaged her thigh bone, and the prognosis was dire, 3 years at best. But in the end, we had only 3 months. She spent her final days in a hospice in the heart of the city, about a 45-minute drive from our home. Just a week before she passed, my dad, ever so gentle, had asked her, "If something happens, would I have your blessing to remarry someday, for companionship?" Mom, frail but aware, met his gaze and simply nodded. Yes, it was a moment filled with understanding, one that didn't need any further words. That night when the call came, I turned to my husband. "Let's go see her," I said. The hospice allowed visits at any hour, giving families a chance to say their goodbyes. It felt final, and as we prepared to leave, my dad, who was staying at our house, asked us to let him know if anything happened. He preferred to say his goodbyes on his own terms. With the kids tucked in bed, my husband's cousin offered to stay with them while we left. When we arrived at the hospice and entered Mom's room, the atmosphere felt different, heavy, almost suffocating. The room was warm, too warm, and she lay propped up on pillows. But she looked empty. A few days ago, she had been smiling, despite the pain. Now her lifeless body felt cold, and her half-open eyes seemed to stare blankly into the void. It was too much for me. My chest tightened, and I rushed out of the room, gasping for air. My husband followed, trying to comfort me, while a nurse kindly offered me tea. I refused, still struggling to catch my breath. All I wanted was to leave. We made our way to the car parked on the street, but when my husband turned the key, the engine sputtered and died. Confused, he tried again, but the car wouldn't start. It had worked perfectly all week, so why now? That's when it hit me. It felt like Mom was trying to tell us not to leave just yet, but I couldn't go back inside that room. My husband suggested we try to push start the car. I got out to help, while he worked the gears and ignition. We struggled up and down the street, but the car wouldn't budge. "Please, Mom, let us go," I whispered. Then, as if on cue, the engine roared to life. "Thanks, Mom," I muttered under my breath. Coincidence? Perhaps. 2 weeks later, something even stranger happened. My aunt approached my dad with unexpected news. During her final week, Mom had asked her to track down an old schoolmate from the Philippines, a woman she thought might be a good companion for my dad. Mom could only remember her name and the region where she lived. They hadn't seen each other since high school, and Mom had no idea if the woman was even still alive. Through some contacts in the Philippines, my aunt found her. Remarkably, the woman, a schoolteacher caring for her elderly mother, had never married. Not long after, she and my dad began talking, and eventually, she came to Australia to meet us. She was petite, with a hairstyle eerily similar to Mom's. From a distance, you might have mistaken her for my mother, but there was one stark difference: her warmth. She was 10 times more affectionate than Mom had ever been. Her smile lit up every room, and her openness made us feel like family the moment we met her. The following year, my dad married her. Today, I call her Mom, and my kids call her Grandma. And then, the strangest coincidence of all, my 2 daughters share the same birthday as my mother. Mom, February 5, 1938. First daughter, February 5, 1994. Second daughter, February 5, 2000. What are the odds? Is it just a coincidence, or is there something more at play here? I often wonder. What do you think? Ever since I was a child, my mother would share stories about our family's encounters with the supernatural. These tales were so vivid and frequent that they became a regular part of my bedtime routine. One of the most memorable stories was about my grandfather's experiences growing up in a small town in Arkansas. When he was about 6 or 7 years old, he would accompany his father to the local church late at night. Why they went at such a strange hour, I'll never know. His father always warned him to stay quiet and calm, no matter what might happen. They'd kneel at the pews, heads bowed in prayer, when my grandpa would notice something unsettling. From the shadows, ghostly figures began to emerge, stepping out from the walls of the church's altar. These translucent shapes slowly walked down the aisle and toward the graveyard behind the church. He could hear faint whispers and the soft rustling of their movements as they passed by. But true to his father's warning, he didn't make a sound. As a child, I found these stories fascinating but dismissed them as little more than bedtime tales. My mother also had her own encounters. She claimed she could see the dead. According to her, they looked just like living people, going about their lives without realizing they had already passed. She described seeing them cry, or even going through everyday tasks, completely unaware of their fate. Again, I just brushed it off. After all, who wants to believe their family has a history of encountering ghosts? As I got older, the stories seemed to fade into the background of my life. That is, until I had my first experience of my own. It was 1993, and I had just moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood with my boyfriend. He worked long hours and attended evening classes, often coming home late at night. One afternoon, around 2 p.m., I felt unusually tired and decided to take a nap before he returned. I was in that drowsy, in-between state, half asleep but still aware of my surroundings, when I felt someone lie down next to me on the bed. I could feel the weight of their body pressing against my back. Assuming it was my boyfriend, I lay still, waiting for his usual greeting. But when nothing happened, I turned to look. To my shock, the bed was empty. No one was there. Yet the sensation of a presence lingered, as if someone had just been there. I was unnerved but tried to brush it off. Nothing else happened in that apartment, and we moved out a year later. Now that boyfriend is my husband, and we've built a life together with our children. We recently celebrated 14 years of marriage, but the inexplicable continues to follow me. One recent morning, around 7 a.m., the house was still and quiet. I got up to use the bathroom and glanced toward the living room. From where I stood, I could see the TV and a girl with long, dark hair sitting in a chair right in front of it. The TV was off, which struck me as odd, but I assumed it was my eldest daughter. However, when I looked again, the girl was gone. Confused, I opened my daughter's bedroom door. She was fast asleep, completely undisturbed. Feeling uneasy, I finished in the bathroom and returned to bed. I woke my husband to tell him what I had seen. In his half-awake state, he mumbled, "Maybe they're trying to contact you," before rolling over and falling back to sleep. His casual reaction didn't help my growing confusion. Experiences like these have become an unsettling part of my life. I still don't know what the spirits want from me or why I seem to encounter them. It was back in 2006 when my ex-best friend and I were living together in a small, rundown apartment above a tattoo shop on Main Street in our little town. The tattoo shop always seemed to have a streak of bad luck, burst pipes, random power outages, while the rest of the street was just fine. Looking back, I can't help but wonder if there was something more sinister at work. What I'm about to share with you is something I'll never forget, no matter how strange it sounds. At the time, I had recently started dating someone new, and I was spending most of my nights at his place. One morning, around 7 or 8 a.m., I came home before he had to leave for work. My friend, Kat, was awake in her room and called me over to sit with her. She looked shaken, her eyes wide with fear. She said that during the night, she had heard footsteps and the sound of people running on the roof. It was so unsettling that she even called the police, but they found nothing. I dismissed it, thinking maybe she just needed more rest. That night, for the first time in a while, I stayed at the apartment. My boyfriend was out with his friends, and I thought it might be nice to have a quiet evening. I had no idea that quiet would turn into something much worse. I don't remember every detail of that night, but some moments have stayed with me, etched into my memory. While sitting in the living room, I started noticing tiny sparks of light flickering around the room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I asked Kat if she saw it too. She nodded, her face drained of color. When the sparks touched me, they stung slightly, like tiny electric shocks. The sensation only lasted for a second, but it was enough to make me feel uneasy. Trying to shake off the strange feeling, I decided to play some music. A song by Rihanna, SOS, was playing, and for a moment, it seemed to help. But then, something bizarre happened. The music started to slow down, like a record playing at the wrong speed. Suddenly, a high-pitched screeching noise came from the speakers, somewhere between a scream and a distorted voice. It froze me in my seat. Kat, in a panic, ran to turn off the CD player but accidentally broke it in the process. The sound was disturbingly childlike, and it rattled me to the core. Things only got stranger after that. We started noticing strange markings on the walls, things we hadn't seen before. At first, they seemed like random scribbles, but as we looked closer, they started to form shapes, crosses, figures of men near what looked like graveyards. My bedroom, where I never felt comfortable, became the focal point. I hadn't even unpacked my things or set up my bed since moving in, and now I understood why. The drawings on the walls grew more vivid, almost as though they were telling a story. Down the hallway, there was a drawing that looked like the head of a shark, its mouth wide open, moving along the wall as if it were swimming toward us. The detail was so lifelike you could almost feel the texture of its eyes under the paint. Behind the front door, there was a faint outline of a man hanging, with the doorknob forming the noose. But the most unsettling image, by far, was of a man wearing a black cowboy hat. His face was always hidden, but his twisted, eerie smile was unmistakable. This figure appeared everywhere, in every room, on every wall, but the worst was outside Kat's bedroom. The drawings seemed to tell a grim story. First, the man walking down the hallway with a gun in his hand. Next, a figure lying on the ground, the man standing over it. And finally, a close-up of his shadowy face as he walked away, that haunting smile still visible under his hat. I'll never forget that image for as long as I live. The strange activity didn't stop with the drawings. We started hearing footsteps running up and down the hallway, even when no one was around. Sometimes, while sitting on my bed, I'd feel the mattress dip as though someone had jumped onto it. The sheets would move as if an invisible hand were tugging at them. Above the doors, there were strange white fingerprints that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. I have no idea what happened in that house before we moved in, but it was clear that it was heavy with something dark. The more we reacted to the strange events, the more intense they became. Even now, years later, I can't drive past that building without feeling a chill run down my spine. From the time I was 7 years old, I began having what I initially thought were just nightmares. In these dreams, dark shadows would appear by my bed, and I couldn't move or look away. Everything around me, the furniture, the posters on the walls, even the clock, looked exactly the same as when I fell asleep. For a while, I didn't even realize it wasn't real. I'd hear myself scream, and I'd wonder why my mom wasn't there to help. Eventually, though, I convinced myself it was all in my head, just my imagination running wild. That's what I told myself, at least. But these shadows, they terrified me. They weren't just vague shapes, they had a presence. I could always sense which ones were male and which were female, though they never had any clear features. There was always this overwhelming feeling that they wanted to hurt me. For years, I dreaded going to sleep, terrified that I might see them again. Even now, I find it hard to sleep soundly at night. One day, I went to a psychic, a woman in a quiet little shop near the outskirts of town. She told me something I didn't expect. "Those aren't just dreams," she said. "They're spirits trying to communicate with you." She explained that the feeling of being frozen, unable to move, was because I had left my body and entered their world, even if just for a moment. "Don't be afraid," she added. "Listen to them. Ask them what they want." I hadn't told her about my dreams, so hearing this made me wonder if there was some truth to it. I decided to face my fear. For the first time in years, I slept with the lights off. About a month later, I had the worst dream yet. A shadow came closer than ever, moving so fast it was like it was made of swirling smoke or flames. It felt angry, and I was terrified. But I remembered the psychic's advice. I forced myself to ask, "What do you want?" Suddenly, I woke up, feeling completely drained, like I had run a marathon. My body was numb, tingling with exhaustion. I stayed up the rest of the night, too afraid to close my eyes again. Another time, I fell asleep while watching TV. I didn't even realize I had drifted off, since the movie was still playing in the background. But this time, the shadows were different. They were soft, like blurs of light and shadow, no longer dark and threatening. They felt almost peaceful, as if they wanted to help. I felt my body lift from the couch, floating above the ground. The shadows guided me, showing me how to glide effortlessly. But when I looked back, I saw they had surrounded my body. That's when the panic hit. I remembered what the psychic had warned me. Some spirits aren't kind. Some try to keep you from coming back. Desperately, I forced myself to wake up. When I did, the TV was still playing, right where it had been. It was like no time had passed at all. The realization chilled me. Over the years, I've been told by other psychics that I have a gift. 10 years ago, my sister told me she was pregnant, and out of nowhere, I had a vision. I saw her sitting alone in a room beside a white coffin covered in pink and white flowers. I told our mom, "She's having a girl, but the baby won't survive." My mom was furious, thinking I was cursing the family, and told me to keep it to myself. But she ended up telling my sister, and for weeks, that's all anyone talked about. Months later, my niece passed away from a rare genetic condition. Her coffin was exactly as I had seen it, white with pink and white flowers. But my sister wasn't alone. She told me afterward that her mother-in-law had picked the flowers, not her. I've had other visions of pregnancies, deaths, accidents, but they come at random. I never know when they'll happen or who they're about. More often than not, something does happen, but I can't control it or predict it on purpose. These visions used to come regularly, but as the years went on, they nearly stopped. Now I rarely feel that same heavy sense of dread that used to grip me before something bad happened. Even with all this, I still struggle to believe that I have a gift. Sometimes I even laugh at myself for considering it. But when the dreams come, when the shadows return, I can't help but wonder, what if it's all real? I live in the small coastal town of Pine Ridge, nestled on the edge of a quiet stretch of land in the Pacific Northwest. It's a peaceful place, where the fog rolls in thick off the ocean, and the ever-present trees seem to whisper when the wind picks up. The town is isolated enough that it often feels like the wild is only a breath away. Winter storms bring heavy rains and flooding, so the streets are lined with ditches that run along the roadways to carry the water away. Between the houses, overgrown patches of ivy and wild grass stretch out, almost swallowing up the edges of the sidewalks. It's the kind of place where nature is always just a little too close, and you can never forget it. 2 Saturdays ago, on August 12th, around 5:30 in the afternoon, I was walking alone. Normally, I'd have my dog, Max, with me, but he wasn't feeling well that day. A nasty cold had left him sluggish, and he wasn't up for our usual walk. As I crossed a narrow concrete bridge that spanned a small creek near the edge of town, I heard it. A low, heavy breathing coming from the ditch below. At first, I thought it might be someone just taking a nap or a homeless person resting in the brush. But then, a memory came flooding back. I'd been jogging through a park years ago, with Max trotting beside me, when I nearly ran into a wild dog. It had stepped out from behind a tree, its teeth bared, eyes wide with a predatory gaze. That moment had stuck with me, and now, standing there on the bridge, the memory crept back into my mind. It was a reminder of how close we are to the untamed. I quickly crossed to the other side, pausing at a safe distance, and glanced back into the ditch. It was empty. I felt a little braver and took a step closer, trying to make sense of the sound. It came again, but this time I leaned over the railing to get a better look. Still nothing. Just the usual, discarded soda cans and overgrown weeds. As I straightened up, a hot, foul-smelling breath brushed my ear. Fear gripped me, a cold, suffocating wave that went straight through to my bones. This wasn't just anxiety. It was pure, visceral terror. I stumbled backward, spinning around to face the source, but there was nothing to see. Yet the breath continued, and with it, the unmistakable scent of something rotten, something wild. The rancid, sharp odor of a dog, one that had tasted blood. Before I could fully grasp what was happening, something pressed against my chest. It wasn't paws or hands. It was a weight, an invisible pressure, as though something was holding me in place. Then came the howl, a guttural, primal sound that shattered the stillness around me. My mind flashed to that wild dog from years ago, its eyes locked onto mine, its jaws ready to snap. The memory overwhelmed me, until I couldn't tell where the past ended and the present began. It felt like a reckoning, like a cosmic debt I had unknowingly racked up, and now the collector had come to claim it. And just like that, it stopped. The breath, the pressure, the howling, gone. I stood frozen in place, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest for what felt like an eternity. Days passed, and though the fear still lingered, so did something else, a pull, something that kept calling me back. I had to return. It took 4 days for me to gather the courage, but on Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., I found myself walking back to that same bridge. I stood in the center of the bridge and waited. Minutes passed. Nothing. I began to replay the memory of the wild dog, reliving every detail, the way its lip curled, the flash of its teeth. But this time, the memory didn't scare me. The fear was gone. As I stood there, reflecting on what had happened, I realized something. The first time I crossed that bridge, there was a sound, breathing, that I could interpret however I wanted. The second time, it became something I feared most. A dog's breath. A dog's stench. Whatever this presence was, it had shown me my own fear. Maybe it had been trying to help me face it, or maybe it had its own reasons for making me confront it. We often forget how closely we are tied to nature, but perhaps, just maybe, there's a part of nature that needs us to remember. I'm hoping someone out there can shed some light on what's been happening. My sister and I have both had some unsettling experiences, and as the nights go on, I think we're starting to frighten ourselves a little more. My sister, Emily, has 4 children, with her eldest, Olivia, being 23. I visit their house often, especially after I've spent time at our mom's hospital room, which can be a long and emotional visit late at night. A few nights ago, I was sitting in their living room when I saw something. just a quick glimpse of a small dark figure dart across the room. It moved so fast that at first I thought I might have imagined it. But when I turned my head, I saw that Emily had noticed my reaction, and she asked what was wrong. When I told her what I thought I saw, she explained that their family has experienced things like this before. The figure is small, almost childlike, and it appears in different parts of the house. Emily's partner, Matt, once thought it was one of the kids hiding under the bed. He even called out, "What are you doing?" But when he checked, there was no one there. On other occasions, Emily has felt something pressing down on her in bed, almost as if something invisible was holding her in place. Once she woke up to find herself face to face with a very old, terrifying woman staring down at her. What's even more unsettling is that Olivia, who sleeps downstairs alone, had an eerily similar experience. Without knowing about her mother's encounter, she described feeling pressure on her chest one night and waking up to see the same old woman staring at her. It's hard to ignore how closely their stories mirror each other. One night, after I thought I saw the shadow, something else strange happened. I was about to leave their house when I reached for the door handle, and it jiggled on its own, before I even touched it. I froze for a moment before finally opening the door and walking out. Another time, as I was about to leave, I heard knocking on the door. It sounded soft, almost like a door swaying in the breeze, but when I opened it, no one was there. The night was still and silent. No wind, no explanation. The strangeness doesn't stop at their house, though. A few nights ago, Olivia stayed over at my place to help watch my son, and the next morning, she told me she felt something strange while in my son, Jack's room. She said she saw more than one dark shadow standing in front of her as she lay on the sofa bed in the living room. Her description sent a chill through me, as it reminded me of the shadow I'd seen at Emily's house. When Jack was a baby, he used to look up at the ceiling and giggle uncontrollably. I never saw anything, so I told myself it must have been his angels keeping him company. As long as he was happy, I figured there was no harm. Now his younger brother, Luke, has taken over that room, and he sometimes has those same fits of laughter at night. I try to tell myself it's a good thing, but with everything else going on, I can't help but wonder. Growing up, I was one of 5 children, living on a farm in a small town in Texas. Our house wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable, and we always had enough. Even as a kid, I experienced things I couldn't explain, strange sounds, shadows that moved on their own, and that unsettling feeling of being watched. Over the years, I pushed those experiences aside, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. Years later, after I got married and had children of my own, my husband and I moved into his family's old farmhouse. It was a place full of history, a house that had been passed down through generations. His grandmother had passed away there years ago, and his grandfather had died in a hospital not far from town. The house was full of memories, both beautiful and bittersweet. But as we settled in, it quickly became clear that this house held more than just the echoes of the past. One evening, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I saw them. 2 figures, glowing faintly, moving past the kitchen door. They walked side by side, like a couple, their hands seemingly brushing together in the dim light. I saw them out of the corner of my eye, and for a moment, everything froze. I turned toward the door and stepped out, following the path they had taken. But when I reached the doorway, there was nothing. No one. My husband was sitting in the living room, just a few feet away in the direction the figures had come from. I asked him, "Did you see that?" He looked up at me confused. See what? I told him what I'd seen, but he had no answer. Still, I knew in my heart who they were. It had to be his grandparents, reunited in the place they'd once called home. It wasn't a frightening sight. In fact, it gave me a sense of peace. The question of whether spirits linger after death had been answered for me. But that wasn't the only strange occurrence in that house. There were nights when we'd hear footsteps across the old wooden floors, even though everyone was in bed. One afternoon, we came home to find the microwave running, empty, with no food inside, and it had been turned off when we left. We just stared at it, unable to make sense of it. Finally, we unplugged it, just to be safe. On some mornings, we'd wake up to find the fridge door wide open, as if someone had been looking for something in the night. My husband once woke in the middle of the night, swearing he saw his grandfather standing by the fireplace, staring at the hearth. As for me, there were moments when I felt something. Someone was in the room with us. It wasn't a person, but the air felt heavy, and the silence felt charged. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Hey everyone, I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. It all started when I was just a little kid, around 2 or 3 years old. My family lived in this old, crumbling farmhouse in a small town, and my dad always said that the previous owners had been involved in some strange, dark rituals. Though I don't remember much from that time, my dad would tell me I used to refuse to sleep in my room. Every night, I would drag my mattress out of my bedroom and lay it right in front of my parents' door. I can barely move a mattress now, let alone when I was that young. When my dad asked me why, I would tell him, "The bad man keeps talking to me." Eventually, the strange happenings stopped, at least for a while. When I turned 13, things started up again. One morning during the holidays, I woke up in bed, suddenly frozen. I could hear someone scream, "Oh God, help me, please help." Thinking it was my mom, I rushed to her room, but she was fine and said she hadn't heard a thing. Confused, I returned to my own room. About 30 minutes later, I heard a voice again, but this time it just said, "Hey, didn't you help me?" That's when everything started to escalate. One night, a friend was sleeping over, and we were joking around with the lights off when I saw something move in the corner of my eye. It was like a shadow, but darker than the room itself, and there was no light to cast it. I watched as it moved slowly across the wall and toward the hallway. I asked my friend if she could see it, but she didn't. Just as the shadow disappeared into the hall, my dad walked in and immediately noticed how cold the room had gotten. He told us to move to my bedroom, and that was that. A month later, I woke up to a chilling sight. There was a dark figure standing over me. My room wasn't pitch black. There was enough light from my stereo to see it clearly. I screamed and hid under my blankets, not coming out until morning. A few months after that, it happened again. This time, the figure stood at the foot of my bed, but this time there was a little girl in front of him. She was dressed in a white, old-fashioned dress, and she looked so upset. I could tell immediately that she wasn't the one causing the terror, but the man behind her was. I closed my eyes, hoping they'd disappear. When my dad and I moved into a new house, the very first morning, he heard someone say, "Hello." Without thinking, he said hello back, thinking it was me. Later, he asked why I was up so early, but I hadn't even left my bed. That same day, after he left for work, I heard a man's voice say, "Hi." I thought Dad had come back, but no one was there. We later found out that a family who had lived in that house had tragically died in a car crash. Now we've moved again, just a few months ago, and this house is the worst one yet. It's an old farmhouse out in the country, full of history, but not the kind you want to remember. From the first night, I began seeing things. Almost every night, I see an old man with a bushy beard walking across my room. He's not fully solid. He's almost like a shadow, but he glares at me with this wicked look. Lights that are off suddenly flicker on, and doors open by themselves, as if they're just waiting for someone to step through. No matter how hot it gets outside, this house is freezing cold. We don't have air conditioning or even a working heater, so there's no reason for it. Things are always shifting around the house too. I'll leave my guitar in the living room, only to find it in the kitchen the next morning. And then there's the little girl. She's appeared again, and I don't know why she's still following me. My dad doesn't see much, but I do. My Nana, who stayed with us, has the same problem. She's seen things her whole life, I'm just so tired of it. I don't know how to stop this or how to help them. I'm just so tired of being scared every night. It was a quiet summer evening when I stayed over at my aunt's house for the night. She and her 2 kids were living there with my grandparents, but my grandparents were away on a trip. My aunt needed to prepare for an upcoming medical procedure, so she was taking a lot of laxatives. To help out, I stayed the night with my cousin Alex to keep an eye on her kids. The house was small, a cozy 2-story home in the sleepy town of Pine Creek. It had 3 bedrooms that were all clustered together. My cousin Alex was in his own room, while I settled into my cousin Emma's room for the night. Emma, along with our other cousin Sarah, was sleeping in my aunt's room. My aunt chose the couch in the living room, hoping the frequent bathroom trips wouldn't disturb anyone. As everyone was winding down for bed, I was lying on Emma's bed, waiting for my aunt to turn off the light. I was just starting to drift off when I felt something brushing against my legs. At first, I thought it was one of the family's pets, cats, mostly, but when I opened my eyes, there was nothing there. The sensation, though, lingered. It was subtle but unsettling, like something was lingering too close. A few moments later, my aunt brought in their new kitten, telling me to keep it with me for comfort. As the light went out, I lay there, petting the kitten to settle myself. But the kitten became oddly still, its wide eyes locked on the wall behind my head. Its ears flattened, and suddenly, it darted from the room, its tiny paws pattering down the hallway. That left me even more uneasy. I noticed then that the room had gotten strangely cold. The air, which had been thick with summer warmth just moments ago, had turned icy. Emma's bed was beside a window, and I could hear the sounds of the outside world clearly, every rustle of the trees and the faint hum of distant traffic. But then, something unexpected happened. I began to hear 2 men talking outside, their voices drifting into the room like whispers from a forgotten era. At first, I thought it was just some neighbors walking past, but their conversation felt so out of place, formal, clipped, almost as if they were speaking in old-timey language. Intrigued, I got up and peeped out the window. There was no one there, yet their voices still echoed clearly in my ears. I lay back down, trying to ignore it, when something else caught my attention. In the hallway, I could make out the figure of someone standing just outside Emma's room. Startled, I shouted at her to go back to bed, chasing her down the hall and slamming the door behind her. But even with the door shut, the unease didn't leave me. That's when I saw her. In the doorway, just beneath the flickering light switch, there was the unmistakable silhouette of a small girl. She was much shorter than Emma, with long hair that swayed like shadows in the dim light. My heart skipped a beat. It couldn't have been Emma. Her door had creaked when she left, but I hadn't heard anything from this figure. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Something gleamed in the child's hand. It was long and shiny, almost like a knife blade. My body froze, a surge of dread flooding my chest. The little figure moved forward, slow and deliberate. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. Instead, I shut my eyes, praying that when I opened them again, it would be gone. When my aunt rushed into the room and flipped the light on, the figure had vanished. My heart still pounding, I ran straight into Emma's room. She was fast asleep, oblivious to everything, and I realized the figure I had seen couldn't have been her. I was too shaken to return to that room. I found my aunt in the kitchen, sitting alone, and joined her while she smoked a cigarette to calm her nerves. But as she stepped away to use the bathroom, I was left there alone. Her dog, a large mutt, sat quietly at my feet. I bent down to pet it, my mind still racing, trying to shake the images of what I had seen. Suddenly, I felt something gentle, a light touch on my back, as though someone was offering comfort. I straightened up, looking around, but there was no one there. To this day, I refuse to sleep in that room. Emma told me later that she's seen and heard strange things there too. There's something in that house, something I can't explain, something I'll never forget. Have I been sharing my workplace with a ghost? That's the question I've been asking myself ever since strange things began happening in the office building I clean. It all started when my aunt and I launched a small cleaning business and took on subcontracted jobs for offices. One of our regular clients is a large 3-story building. Between the two of us, it takes 4.5 hours a night, 5 nights a week to clean. When my aunt Debbie was still working with me, the odd occurrences were subtle. She would often turn to me and ask, "What did you say?" as if I'd spoken to her, but I hadn't said a word. It became a bit of a joke, but neither of us thought too much of it at the time. But when Debbie left, I started noticing more. One night, while cleaning the second floor with a new staff member, we were hit by a terrible smell coming from the kitchen area. It was so overpowering that it soon spread through the entire floor. We tried to ignore it, but eventually, we moved on to cleaning the main office. That's when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of the double glass doors rattling. At first, I assumed it was someone coming into the office across the hall. But when it happened again, I went to check. There was no one there. A growing sense of unease settled over us, but we pressed on. Then the doors rattled again, louder this time. We rushed downstairs, sticking together as we finished cleaning the first floor. That's when we realized something strange. The keys I'd left on the table by the glass doors were gone. We searched the area, but couldn't find them. Hours later, the staff found the keys in the men's bathroom, the very first place we checked. Soon, these strange occurrences became routine. Cleaning supplies would vanish only to appear in places we didn't remember putting them. Phones would randomly play music or radio stations, then stop the moment we walked away. It was unsettling, but we managed, until last night. Jody, one of the other staff members, had started her shift before I arrived. About 30 minutes into her shift, she called me in a panic. She had heard a woman's voice say, "Hi," but she was alone in the building. I told her to wait downstairs until I arrived with my Uncle Kerry, who sometimes helped out. The three of us returned upstairs together, and for a while, everything seemed fine. Later, Jody and I took the lift down to take out the trash. I left her on the ground floor while I went back up to grab Carrie and set the alarms. When I stepped out of the lift, I saw the vacuum cleaner, but no sign of Carrie. Then I heard laughter from behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. Moments later, Carrie appeared from the office to my right. I asked him if he'd been laughing, but he insisted he hadn't. As we packed up for the night, we noticed that the mop had gone missing. We took the lift back to the first floor to search for it. As we headed back down, I felt a sudden unease. There were 4 people in the lift, not 3. It was only for a brief moment, but I saw it. Something standing behind us, a shadowy figure. I didn't say anything until we reached the ground floor, where we quickly retreated to the cleaning room. The cleaning room, usually a comforting space, felt different that night. While sitting at the table, Jody suddenly screamed, pointing at the light overhead. It was swinging wildly, though no one had touched it. Carrie tried steadying the light, and we even tried slamming the door to see if it made the light swing. But nothing worked. No matter what we did, the light swung back and forth unnaturally. That was the last straw for me. I handed in my resignation today. I'll finish out the month, but I can't keep working in that building. I've never felt this kind of fear in my life, and whatever is in that office, I don't want to stick around to find out. Ellie is my partner's favorite aunt. She's in her late 60s and has lived alone ever since her husband Tom passed away a few years ago. Recently, Ellie went through a major health scare. She was diagnosed with a severe E. coli infection and had to be placed into an induced coma for a week. It was a frightening time for everyone. No one knew if she would make it. But against the odds, Ellie pulled through. She's still a bit frail, but every day she's getting stronger, slowly returning to her old self. Yesterday, my partner and I decided to visit Ellie to check on her. For some context, I've always been a believer in the paranormal, while my partner is a complete skeptic. Given Ellie's near-death experience, I was curious to know if she had any kind of encounter during her time in the coma. When I asked, she said she couldn't remember anything unusual during that time. But the conversation soon shifted to ghosts, and Ellie told us a story about her late sister, Beth, who passed away 2 years ago. Beth's death came as a complete shock. She'd never shown any signs of health problems, so her sudden heart attack was a huge blow. Ellie and Beth had been very close, and her absence has left a hole in Ellie's heart. In her living room, Ellie keeps a photo of Beth on a small side table. Not long after Beth passed, something strange happened. One evening, while Ellie was watching TV, the photo of Beth suddenly fell to the floor, and the frame shattered. There were no open windows or breezes to explain it. Ellie's son, Matt, fixed the frame and placed the photo back where it had been. But not long after, with Matt sitting beside her, the photo fell again. This time, they both laughed and joked, saying Beth must not have liked where the picture was. She was always so picky, Ellie said. Maybe she just wanted a better view of the room. They decided to hang the photo on the wall, where it stayed without incident. But that's not the part of the story Ellie wanted to focus on. Ellie started by saying, "I don't believe in this sort of thing," which immediately caught my attention. Ellie is the kind of person who runs her home with military-like precision. Every morning, without fail, she gets up, makes her bed, and gets dressed before doing anything else, not even having a cup of coffee first. One morning, shortly after Beth's passing, Ellie followed her usual routine. Once she was ready for the day, she left her bedroom and stepped into the hallway. That's when she saw Beth. Beth appeared to Ellie, coming through the window, wearing a flowing white dress. She wasn't alone. There was a man standing beside her, though Ellie didn't recognize him. Shocked, Ellie asked, "Beth, what are you doing here?" Beth replied calmly, "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." The man stood silently beside her. Overcome with emotion, Ellie started crying. She knew Beth shouldn't have been there. After all, she had only just passed away. Ellie's neighbor, Ruth, happened to stop by for a cup of coffee shortly after. Seeing Ellie so upset, Ruth asked what was wrong. Ellie told her about what had happened. Strangely, Ellie didn't mention how Beth and the man left or how long they stayed. She wasn't scared, just deeply moved and shaken. I told Ellie, "You're lucky. Beth came back to show you she loves you and is still watching over you." So many people would give anything for one last moment with someone they've lost. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about the man who had been with Beth. I suggested to my partner that it might have been Ellie's late husband, Tom. My partner wasn't convinced. He pointed out that Beth and Tom never got along well in life. But to me, I think those old disagreements fade once people pass on. It makes sense to me. Tom and Beth shared one thing in common, their love for Ellie. Perhaps Tom had come along to help Beth deliver her message. He stayed in the background, allowing Beth to take the lead since it was her message to give. Whether or not the man was Tom, one thing is clear. The visit was meant to bring Ellie comfort, and I believe it did. I'm 16 now, but since I can remember, my family has always insisted on taking weekend trips to the countryside or the coast with friends. 2 years ago, during the fall break, we decided to visit the old Whitmore farmstead in the rolling hills of Kentucky. I've always had a soft spot for old houses, but something about this one felt different. From the moment we pulled up, it was a large 2-story farmhouse, complete with a couple of guest rooms upstairs, a cozy kitchen, and an old wooden shed out back. I was eager to explore, but there was a strange sense of unease I couldn't shake as I stepped over the threshold. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the house seemed to change. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to stretch longer, and I found myself jumping at the smallest sounds. Luckily, our friends arrived shortly after, bringing laughter and life back to the place. The adults gathered downstairs, chatting away, while the kids ran up and down the stairs, their laughter echoing through the halls. My friend Mel and I were setting up her family's room, room 4, upstairs. Meanwhile, the other kids stayed downstairs, mesmerized by ghost stories being told around the fireplace. I decided to carry some of Mel's bags upstairs while she stayed behind, trying to convince her mom to let her bring her hairdryer. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed how cold the air felt. It was a sharp chill, almost too cold for a fall evening. I stopped to pull the sweater tied around my waist on. Figuring someone must have left a window open, I carried the bags down the hall toward Mel's room. The door was ajar, and that's when I saw her. Standing by the window was a woman. Her skin was deathly pale, almost translucent, and something about her seemed wrong. Without thinking, I called out to her. She turned, just once, and then, in a split second, she stepped through the window. But the window was closed. My heart froze in my chest as I dropped the bags right there in the hall. Without another second to think, I turned and sprinted downstairs, my pulse racing, unable to explain what I had just witnessed. That night, sleep was impossible. Every noise, every creak of the old house seemed amplified. At one point, I thought I heard a faint wail from somewhere upstairs, but I convinced myself it was just the house settling. Or maybe my imagination running wild. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the first light of morning finally broke, I was the first one awake. Still feeling uneasy, I wandered downstairs to the front hall. On the table near the door was an old guest book. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Flipping through the pages, I came across an entry that sent a shiver down my spine. The entry described a tragic event that took place back in the 1800s. It spoke of a man who had once owned the farm. He was married to a young woman, but had been spending more and more time in town with a mistress. One fateful night, his wife, overwhelmed with jealousy and rage, pushed him out of the east window. Realizing what she had done, she then threw herself from the same window not long after. As I read the account, the air seemed to grow colder, and I couldn't help but glance over toward the east window, the very same one I had seen the woman standing near. I closed the book with trembling hands, stepping back. Was it just a lingering memory of the past? Or was something else still trapped in this old house? One chilly evening, I was relaxing in my room, watching TV, when I suddenly felt the unsettling sensation that someone, or something, was watching me. At first, I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my imagination. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a shadow move. It seemed to come from the corner near my bookcase, but I dismissed it, telling myself there was nothing to worry about. I clicked off the TV and reached for the light switch, ready to head to bed. In my room, I have two mirrors, one on either side of the room. The larger one hangs on the wall next to my bed. As I reached for the switch, something in that mirror caught my attention. His shadow moved across its surface. My heart skipped a beat. When I turned to look at the spot where the shadow should have been, I noticed something odd. A faint, dark haze near the bookcase. It was barely noticeable at first, but once I saw it, I couldn't look away. I stared, trying to make sense of it, and then it moved. A sharp pain shot through my head, as if someone had slammed a hammer against my skull. My headache was so intense that I had to clutch my temples, trying to steady myself. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping the pain would pass. When I opened them again, the shadow was gone. I let out a shaky breath, scanning the room. But then, I saw it again. This time, it was closer. The dark haze wasn't faint anymore. It had become thicker, darker. Slowly, an outline of a man started to form. His shape was massive, solid-like, but still distorted. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I watched him. Without warning, the shadow began to shift, shrinking toward the floor. My breath caught in my throat. I froze, unable to bring myself to look down, terrified of what might be there. I stayed still, my pulse racing as I waited for it to pass. For what felt like an eternity, I didn't move, just staring at the figure, praying it would leave. When I finally felt like I could move again, I reached for the light switch, but just as my fingers grazed it, something grabbed my arm. It wasn't a strong pull, but it was enough to make my breath hitch in my throat. And then, as if from nowhere, the words "back moment" flashed into my mind. They meant nothing. but they sent chills down my spine. I glanced back at the shadow, my mind racing for what to do next. I shut my eyes tightly, hoping that when I opened them, it would be gone. But when I looked again, the figure had returned to its original spot by the bookcase. I knew I had to do something, so I spoke up, my voice shaking. "Go away," I told it, my words trembling but firm. To my surprise, the shadow started to move, gliding slowly across the room toward the door. As it passed, it brushed against a bottle of perfume on the small table by the door, knocking it to the floor. My hands trembled as I flicked off the light and crawled under the covers, hoping to escape whatever was happening. But the feeling of safety never came. The weight of the covers felt too heavy, pressing tightly against me as though the air had been sucked from the room. I tried to move, but it was as if I were pinned in place. That's when I heard it, a low, animal-like wail. The sound was disturbing, agonizing, and it sent waves of fear coursing through my body. Suddenly, my bed began to shake, as if something was trying to tear me apart from the inside. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, struggling to free myself from the blankets. Finally, I managed to get my head out, and that's when I saw it. The shadowy figure was standing across the room, staring directly at me. Its eyes, blacker than the darkness around it, locked onto mine. My bed continued to tremble beneath me, and the suffocating weight of the blankets kept me trapped. In a panic, I screamed as loud as I could, and in an instant, everything stopped. The shaking ceased, the blankets loosened, and the shadow vanished. I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the room, still in my pajamas, and ran straight to my car. Without a second thought, I drove to my friend's house, my hands shaking as I told her everything that had happened. She listened, offering her comfort, but I couldn't shake the terror. I couldn't even bear the thought of going back to that room to sleep. The most terrifying experience I've ever had felt far too real to be a mere nightmare. In fact, it was so vivid and unsettling that to this day, I struggle to accept it was just a dream. It happened one evening after what I thought was a deep, peaceful sleep. As I woke, I felt an intense heaviness on my chest, like I couldn't breathe, like something, or someone, was choking me. My lungs burned as I struggled to take in air, and in that moment, panic set in. I opened my eyes, and there, sitting under the covers, was a figure. It was a woman, but her presence was wrong. Her knees were pressing down into my chest, pinning my arms beneath her weight, and her hands gripped tightly around my throat. At first, I couldn't make out her face, but the feeling of her hands around my neck was undeniable. Desperate, I tried to scream out for help. My wife, Sarah, was in the other room. She was working on her laptop, just across the hallway. But despite my best efforts, only a faint, breathless murmur escaped my lips. I couldn't shout. I couldn't make a sound loud enough for her to hear me. The pressure around my throat kept tightening. I fought back as hard as I could, twisting and turning beneath her weight, trying to break free. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to free one hand and knocked lightly against the wall, hoping the noise would reach Sarah. In that brief moment, I felt a surge of strength. I pushed with everything I had, forcing the figure off me just as Sarah burst into the room. It was only then, in the dim light, that I saw her face clearly. A woman, but her face was pale, almost ghostly, as if she had been submerged in water for far too long. Her blonde hair clung to her face and her eyes. Those empty, lifeless eyes sent a chill through me. Sarah helped me shake the figure off, and as I turned to hold her, I noticed something even more terrifying. The woman was gone, vanished, as if she'd never been there. Shaken to my core, I asked Sarah to stay with me for the rest of the night. We crawled back into bed, her arms wrapped tightly around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of something being wrong. My heart still raced in my chest as I tried to calm down and fall back asleep. But just as I began to drift off, the weight returned. That unbearable pressure on my chest was back, stronger, more suffocating this time. My heart pounded in my ears as I realized the woman had returned. And this time, Sarah was no longer beside me. The figure was back, pressing down on me, its weight crushing me into the bed. I struggled, fighting with everything I had, but it felt as though I had no strength left. At some point, my vision blurred and I must have passed out. When I woke again, the light was on, and the pressure had disappeared. I sat up, throwing the covers off, breathing heavily as I tried to make sense of everything. My heart was still racing as I rushed to the next room, where Sarah was sitting at her computer, typing away. She looked up at me, her face full of concern. I asked if she had heard me scream or if she had come into the room earlier to check on me, but she just shook her head. She hadn't heard anything. I was left speechless. The only thing I could tell myself was that it must have been a dream. But that feeling, that weight on my chest, it lingered. After doing some research, I learned about sleep paralysis and read about others who had experienced something similar. I wondered if that was what had happened to me, but even now, I'm not so sure. I've been taking antihistamines before bed for over a decade, and I've never had an issue like this. Something about it was different. It didn't feel like a regular nightmare. We didn't just have pets. They were our children's closest companions, always by their side during their adventures, and quietly listening to the stories we told before bed. Poem was the first to join our family. We adopted her from the local animal shelter, a sweet calico with a tortoiseshell pattern and a heart of gold. Her meow was soft, like a whisper, and her nurturing nature stood out. She welcomed every new cat with a gentle lick, and although she wasn't loud, she commanded respect with her quiet confidence. Poem didn't play favorites. She'd curl up on whoever was available, content to share her warmth as we watched TV together on chilly evenings. A couple of years later, White Socks showed up. A scrappy tuxedo cat, he wandered into our yard one winter, searching for somewhere to belong. Unlike Tom, our older, dominant cat, White Socks didn't seek to rule. He was laid back, with a loving heart and a tail that flicked like a rattlesnake when he was excited. He quickly bonded with my son, moving into his room and learning to climb up to his loft bed, where he slept every night. As time passed, our family grew, both in children and in cats. Tom passed away peacefully, and we brought in Skittle, a playful little cat whose family had lost everything in a house fire. Skittle, although loved, had a mischievous streak, having grown up with a puppy. She often played a little too rough, which White Socks tolerated with an admirable patience. When we moved to a new house, we found an unexpected resident, a sleek black cat named Mishifu. She had belonged to the previous owners, but had decided to stay behind with us, rather than move next door with her family. Poem and White Socks welcomed her, as they did all the others, but Mishifu and Skittle never really got along, even after 6 years. As the years passed, our cats aged, and the changes became harder to ignore. Poem developed dental issues and had surgery in her later years, leaving her with a persistent bad breath. White Socks, who had once put up with Skittle's roughhousing, began to protest, no longer interested in her wild games. They slept more, moved less, and their once playful energy faded. We knew we were nearing the end of their journey with us. In April 2021, White Socks stopped eating. He seemed to grow colder with each passing day and became frail. We did our best to make him comfortable, surrounding him with love and warmth. My son, who had been working out of town, asked me to wait for his return so he could say goodbye. When he came back, he dug a grave near his bedroom, wanting White Socks to rest close. On April 20th, under a sky that seemed too blue for such a sad occasion, we took White Socks to the vet for the last time. Due to COVID restrictions, only one of us could go inside, so my son stayed by White Socks' side, holding him as he passed. My daughter and I waited in the parking lot, holding each other as we cried. When it was over, my son emerged with White Socks' small body in a box. We hugged it close, mourning the loss of a friend who had been with us for 17 years. A month later, I had a dream. My children were small again, and we were back in our old house. Outside, where there used to be a driveway, there was now a tropical forest full of cats of all shapes and sizes. Some were playing, others were napping in the sunlight. I saw Tom first, And then White Socks, a gleaming tuxedo cat, jumped onto Tom's back, playful and happy. Their eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew they were together again. In June 2022, it was Pone's turn. Her health declined rapidly. She had trouble finding her way around the house, and she began having episodes that worried us. On her final day, I brushed her soft coat in the warm sunlight, gave her favorite treats, and held her close. We took her to the vet, and though she fought the sedative, her last moments were peaceful. We buried her next to White Socks and planted an iris on her grave. Later, I had another dream about Pone. She was healthy and vibrant, her fur shining in the sunlight. In one dream, I hesitated to touch her, fearing she'd vanish, but when I did, I could feel her soft fur, just as I remembered. Once, I even woke up to the sound of her familiar purring and caught a faint scent of her bad breath, as though she was still with us. I don't know if these were just dreams or if they were visits from my beloved pets, but they brought me a sense of comfort. I like to think that Pone, White Socks, Tom, and the others are together now, watching over us. And someday, when my time comes, I hope Skittle, Mishifu, Ella, and Monkey will find the peace and harmony that seemed so elusive during our time together. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I had always been drawn to Murney Tower, a historic structure nestled in a small town that seemed to whisper of the past. It wasn't just the tower itself that intrigued me, but the stories surrounding it. Built in 1846, it was one of the many fortifications designed to protect against threats during a time when tensions between the U.S. and British territories in North America were high. But what began as a defensive outpost would come to hold darker secrets. Over the years, I'd visited the tower numerous times, but it wasn't until recently that I learned about its eerie history. On the evening of October 6, 2023, I joined a local paranormal investigation group, the Ghost Seekers, for a special night at the tower. The investigation started at 8 p.m. as the crisp autumn air settled in and the sun disappeared behind a wall of dark clouds, adding an unsettling edge to the night. We gathered outside the tower for a group photo before splitting into two teams, men and women, for the exploration. The atmosphere outside was thick with fog, and the old stone walls seemed to exude a sense of unease. My team made our way inside, where we were introduced to the equipment that would help us tap into whatever restless spirits might be lingering there. There were motion sensor alarms that would trigger loud beeps if anything disturbed the air near them, video cameras to capture strange phenomena, and the most fascinating of all, an EVP, electronic voice phenomenon, device. We had all seen these devices on shows like Ghost Hunters, where they supposedly captured the voices of the dead. It was our main tool for the night, and we were eager to see if it could reveal any hidden truths. As we ventured deeper into the tower, the oppressive weight of the place grew heavier. The air inside felt thick, as if unseen eyes were watching us from every corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was there with us. In the foyer, we found old relics from the tower's past, rusty bunk beds, military uniforms, and tools used during its colonial days. We started asking questions into the EVP device, but at first, there was nothing but silence. Next, we moved to the basement, the heart of the tower's paranormal activity. Locals whispered that the spirits of children who had died within its walls still roamed the dark chambers, drawn to the toys left behind for them. In one room, we found 3 plush teddy bears lined up against the wall, their eyes staring blankly ahead. Each one had a motion sensor that would trigger a pre-recorded voice when disturbed. No one was near the toys, but suddenly, one of the bears began speaking in a child's voice. Then another, and another. My heart raced. The voices seemed playful, almost as if the spirits were inviting us to join them. It was as if they were telling us, "We're still here." We wandered through more of the basement's eerie rooms, some lined with cannonballs, others filled with old wine barrels, until we came to a particularly quiet corner. Here, on a black stool, sat a lone EVP recorder. One of my teammates asked, Did you fight with the Americans during the War of 1812? The response was immediate, clear, and unmistakable. A voice, young and male, snapped back with a sharp no. The tone was indignant, as though the spirit was offended by the question. It was so direct, so immediate, that none of us could dismiss it as a coincidence. The air around us seemed to freeze, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. We all knew that EVP devices sometimes picked up stray radio signals, but this felt different. It was too precise, too immediate. We were not alone. But just as the weight of the experience began to settle in, something unexpected happened. I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. It was sudden and intense, forcing me to leave the investigation early. As I walked away from the tower, the feeling of unease didn't fade. In fact, it grew stronger. Something about Murney Tower, the stone walls, the long-forgotten whispers of the past, felt unfinished. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to discover, more spirits to encounter. I left that night, but a part of me already knew I'd return. These events happened just 2 days ago, and writing them down now is my way of keeping the details fresh and accurate. To give you some context, my cousin from Atlanta came to visit me in Savannah with his girlfriend, his mom, and our aunt. My cousin and his girlfriend stayed at an errand near my place, while my two aunts stayed elsewhere. The errand was just a few minutes' drive from me, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood close to Forsyth Park. The area is full of charming old Victorian houses surrounded by live oaks draped in Spanish moss, a peaceful setting, at least on the surface. On their first night, they invited me, my boyfriend, my brother, and another cousin over for drinks and games. While my cousin and his girlfriend were out picking up supplies, I stayed behind with her and my brother, chatting in the kitchen. As we talked, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A leg mid-step, suspended in midair. My heart raced because I knew only the three of us were in the house. Before I could say anything, the overhead light began flickering. My brother and I exchanged nervous laughs, but I didn't mention the leg. I didn't want to scare her since she'd be staying there overnight. The night passed without further incident, though my brother left earlier than the rest of us. The next morning, I brought breakfast and coffee over to their place. Despite the bright sunshine, the house felt oppressively cold and dark. I couldn't shake the unease and suggested sitting on the porch, but my cousin and his girlfriend didn't want to. My eyes kept darting to the hallway where I'd seen the leg the night before. Nothing happened, but the atmosphere felt heavy, almost angry. I chose to keep my thoughts to myself. The following day, their last in Savannah, they visited family before coming to my condo that evening. When they arrived, they seemed withdrawn, a stark change from their usual lighthearted energy. I asked if they were okay, and they brushed it off, saying they were tired. After trying to cheer them up to no avail, I suggested they could take the night to rest instead of hanging out. That's when my cousin asked if I'd noticed anything strange about the airman. I immediately knew what he meant but asked him to explain. He admitted that neither he nor his girlfriend liked the house from the moment they arrived. She'd found the quiet neighborhood unsettling, especially the overgrown lawns on some of the nearby properties. They both described the house as dark and full of anger. They had never argued in their relationship before, but since staying there, they fought every night and felt increasingly drained. His girlfriend revealed she couldn't sleep the previous night and found herself wandering the house in the dark for no reason. Both of them were anxious about spending another night there. My boyfriend and I insisted they stay with us, and they gratefully accepted. Around 2:30 a.m., I went with them to pack their belongings while my boyfriend prepared the sofa bed at home. When we arrived at the house, everything felt eerily still, both outside and inside. As they packed, I waited in the kitchen, clearing out the fridge. I wasn't scared, just eager to help them leave. Then, as the girlfriend entered the kitchen, I heard it, a faint, chilling scream. It sounded otherworldly, like something tearing through from another dimension. Startled, I asked if she heard it, but she hadn't. The sound reminded me of something straight out of a nightmare, and I'll never forget it. Once we finished packing, we locked up the house for the last time. As we left, I spoke aloud, telling whatever was in the house not to follow us. On the drive back, we saw a strange animal cross the street. It looked like a mangy, hairless deer, moving oddly in the dim light. My cousin thought it was a sign that whatever had been haunting them was finally leaving. I wasn't so sure, but the sight added to the unease. Back at my condo, we stayed up until 4 a.m., recounting the events of the weekend. Theories swirled, and we realized that most of the unsettling experiences had targeted the women, me and his girlfriend. She mentioned how, on the first day, she'd struggled to unlock the door, only for my brother to do it effortlessly. It felt like the house had a particular disdain for women. My brother later admitted he'd sensed something watching him from the walls, which was why he kept leaving early. He felt the house didn't want him there. I tried researching the property and its history, but found nothing. Still, I can't shake the feeling that something dark lingers there. Whether it's the result of past tragedies or years of absorbed anger, I may never know. For now, I believe my cousin and his girlfriend's fear was very real, considering their demanding jobs, him as a police officer, her as a nurse. It says a lot that they couldn't handle one more night in that house. It happened when I was 21, a university student in a small, sleepy town in Ohio. I shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment with my girlfriend, Sarah, and her roommate, Emily. The apartment was tucked away on a quiet street, not far from campus, but far from the bustling part of town. We were all balancing schoolwork, part-time jobs, and the occasional weekend outing to unwind. Life felt simple, yet busy, and we handled it all with the carefree attitude that comes with being young. One day, I found myself alone in the apartment when the phone rang. I picked it up, and the voice on the other end sent a chill down my spine. It was Emily, her voice trembling with panic. She told me her mom had been in a terrible car accident back in their hometown, an isolated farm town about 2 hours away. I quickly called Sarah to let her know, and we managed to get Emily on the phone. She was frantic, her emotions unraveling with every word. Emily and Sarah packed their bags in a hurry, leaving me behind in the apartment. That evening, around midnight, I was curled up on the couch, watching some random show on TV, trying to take my mind off everything. The silence of the apartment was oddly comforting after the chaos of the day. But then, the phone in the kitchen rang again. I didn't expect it, but I answered it anyway. Emily's voice, now cracked and broken, told me that her mother had passed away just moments before. The call ended quickly. She couldn't say much more. I hung up, staring at the receiver for a long moment, feeling a deep sense of helplessness. The moment I set the phone back on the receiver, the power went out. The apartment was plunged into darkness, and outside, a storm raged like I'd never seen before. The wind howled against the windows, and I could hear the trash cans in the alley slamming against the wall as if something, or someone, was throwing them around. It was like the world outside was mourning with us, sharing in the grief. I tried to tell myself that it was just a coincidence. A tree had probably fallen on a power line, or something like that. But deep down, something didn't feel right. Then, something strange happened. The light in Emily's room flickered on. The door to her room was shut, but the light spilling out was not like any light I'd ever seen before. It was blinding, almost like the sun was radiating from every crack in the doorframe. My chest tightened as a wave of fear washed over me. I couldn't move. I couldn't even bring myself to approach the door to check what was happening. Instead, I backed away, retreating to the couch. I pulled a blanket over my head, as if hiding from some childhood nightmare. But then, it happened. The floorboards in the kitchen creaked. The sound was so familiar, it made my blood run cold. 3 distinct creaks, each one a signature of someone walking through the kitchen. 1 creak. My heart raced, and I stayed completely still, praying the next one wouldn't come. 2 creaks. Every muscle in my body tensed, a wave of panic coursing through me as I lay frozen, dreading the next sound. 3 creaks. There was someone, or something, just a few feet away from me in the kitchen. I knew if I turned around, I would see something that would tear apart everything I believed to be real. The fear of confronting the impossible, of seeing something I could never explain, was almost as paralyzing as the dread of the presence itself. So I stayed still, burying my face in the blanket, trembling. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but when I woke, it was daylight, and the soft chirping of birds outside the window filled the air. The power was back on, and the apartment was eerily quiet. I searched the apartment, looking for any sign of what had happened the night before, but there was nothing. No broken doors, no mess, no clue that anything had taken place. When I finally told Sarah, she listened, but her skepticism was clear. She brushed it off as my imagination running wild. I never told Emily about the events that had unfolded. It didn't feel right, not when she was dealing with so much pain. Over the years, I tried to make sense of what happened. I checked the floorboards for possible creaks from the vents, looked for drafts, and tested the light in Emily's room to see if the bulb could have caused the unusual brightness. But nothing ever added up. Even now, years later, I still can't explain it. The fear of that night still lingers, not just of the unknown, but of how close I came to confronting it. And to this day, I don't regret not looking. Some things are better left unseen. It all began when I was 10 years old. My family and I had just moved to a small town called Pine Lake, settling into the cheapest house we could find. It was an old, creaky house that seemed to grow with age, its walls whispering secrets from long ago. Some relatives came to help us move in, and my cousin, Jake, decided to stay the night. That was the first time we realized something wasn't right. Jake was in the room I was about to claim as my own, watching a movie on his laptop, when he saw her. A girl with long black hair, pale skin, and a flowing white dress walked past the open door and into the room next to his. He was so terrified by the sight that he didn't stay another night, and to this day, he's never returned to visit. It was only the beginning. After that, strange things began to happen. We hear knocks on the walls, the sound of tapping near my mom's bed, and fleeting shadows that flitted just out of the corner of your eye. It all seemed to build into something much darker. The worst of it came when a shadow figure began following me. I still remember the first time I saw it clearly. My siblings and I were sleeping in the same room the girl had walked into. I woke up to my youngest brother crying, so I quickly got up to settle him down. But as I lay there, trying to get back to sleep, I glanced at the open doorway. That's when I saw it. It was standing just outside the door, nothing but a shifting mass of darkness, a featureless silhouette that didn't belong. It had no eyes, but I could feel its gaze on me. My body froze. I didn't scream or try to run. I just closed my eyes tightly and tried to pretend I wasn't awake. The next morning, I didn't tell anyone, not even my mom. She didn't like talking about things like ghosts or spirits, so I kept it to myself. But the shadow didn't go away. Night after night, I'd see it, sometimes standing in the doorway, sometimes watching me from another room. It followed me around the house, yet no one else seemed to notice it. I never told anyone. The only thing that seemed to keep it at bay was light. It couldn't come near me when the lights were on, so I started keeping a lamp on in my room at all times. Eventually, we moved to a new house across town. By then, I felt a little safer, always sleeping with a light on. But over time, I began to relax. I started to close my door and turn off the lights. That's when it happened again. One night, I woke up to a text from my mom. She was downstairs, wondering if I was awake because the dogs were barking at something. I got up and glanced toward my doorway. That's when I saw her. A girl, lying at the top of the stairs. Her long black hair was draped over her face, and her skin was pale, almost ghostly. I couldn't make out her clothes clearly, but I knew it was her. I could feel it. She looked like she was sleeping, and deep down, something told me I shouldn't wake her. I froze. Slowly, I lay back down, grabbing my phone to distract myself. A little while later, my mom came upstairs to use the bathroom. I watched her carefully to see if she'd noticed the girl, but she didn't. When I looked again, the girl was gone. After that, the strange occurrences began again. My mom even mentioned hearing me talking to people in my sleep, but I didn't remember doing it. I tried to fight it off, hanging up Christmas lights to keep the darkness away. For a while, it worked, and the activity died down. But then, we moved again. I thought that a fresh start would finally put everything behind me. For a few weeks, it seemed like it had. But then I had a nightmare. Something was trying to grab me, and I woke up whispering, "Please don't hurt me." The terror I'd felt before came rushing back. It was as though something was still with me, lurking in the shadows. One night I woke to find something forming on my bookcase. It was as if the shadows were alive, bubbling and swirling, starting to take shape. I shined my phone's flashlight at it, and it disappeared instantly. But now, every time I leave the lights off at night, I see it again, moving around the room, slithering across the furniture, never going near the window where the streetlights shine through. I've tried talking to it, even reaching out to touch it, but it doesn't respond. I don't know what it wants, but I'm too scared to let it take full form again. It was 29 years ago on a quiet Saturday evening in early March. I was 17 at the time, driving with my friend, let's call them Jake, on a road outside of our small town, Pine Ridge. The road curved around a gentle hill, and as we rounded it, I noticed how the streetlights in the town ahead cast an eerie glow, lighting up the clouds above. The night felt still, peaceful. I remember thinking how beautiful the scene was. We rounded the bend, following another car ahead, and I checked my speedometer, making sure I wasn't speeding. Jake was sitting next to me, tapping out the last bit of his cigarette into the ashtray. The whole thing, checking the speedometer, then glancing over at Jake, took no more than a second. But from that moment, my memory gets hazy, and everything changes. The next thing I remember was seeing someone crouched by my driver's door. The glass must have shattered, because I don't remember rolling the window down. It was an EMS worker. I recognized them, though I couldn't recall their name at the time. They told me not to look toward Jake. Their voice was calm, but there was an undeniable urgency in it. I'm not sure why, but I wasn't scared. I felt strangely calm, almost detached, like I was watching all of it from somewhere else. But against their warning, I turned to look at Jake. I still remember it so clearly. Jake's worn green jacket with white sleeves, their black jeans, and those white sneakers. Jake was leaning back in the seat, head tilted toward the passenger side. I couldn't see their face. And then, something I can't explain happened. A light appeared behind Jake. It was bright, blindingly white, and it seemed to radiate outward, like something from another world. In that same instant, I saw Jake standing in front of me. It wasn't their body, not the way I knew them, but it was like their essence, their soul. Jake looked at me and asked, "Are you coming?" The question stunned me. I didn't answer right away. I glanced out the windshield. The world outside was chaos. Emergency lights flashing, people rushing around, fire hoses sprawled out on the pavement. I could see the streetlights flickering and the grain silos lining the road in the distance. It felt unreal, like a scene from a nightmare. Then I thought about my life. 17 years. That's all I'd lived. I hadn't done anything of note. It seemed too short, too unfinished. Is this it? I wondered. I wasn't sure how to answer Jake's question, but I knew one thing. I wasn't ready to go. Not yet. I turned back to look at Jake. They gave me the faintest, knowing smile, calm and understanding, before they turned and walked into the light. As Jake faded, the light faded with them. The world returned to darkness, the soft quiet of the night creeping back in, and I was alone again. The next thing I remember was waking up in the emergency room. I found myself arguing with a doctor, though I don't recall the cause of the argument. My life went on, but Jake's didn't. It wasn't until weeks later that a nurse pulled me aside and said something that sent a chill down my spine. She told me that while I was in the ICU, under heavy morphine, I had described everything. The light, Jake, the question, without fully realizing what I was saying. I didn't remember telling anyone. The morphine had made everything blurry, and at one point, I even thought I was sitting in my friend's living room when, in reality, I was wandering the hospital hallways, pulling out my IV. It all felt so unreal, But when I think back now, I wonder, was Jake trying to guide me somewhere, or was it all just a fleeting, surreal moment of my mind slipping between two worlds? When I moved into Michael's quiet home on Willow Creek Lane, I had no idea how much my life would shift. Michael lived with his daughter, Emily, and their little dog, Bella. He was a kind and caring father, but there was a certain heaviness in the air, something I couldn't quite place. Not long before I moved in, Michael had lost his best friend, Jake, to suicide. Jake had battled depression for years, and his passing left a permanent ache in their lives. Michael and Emily often spoke of Jake, remembering him fondly as someone they deeply loved. Soon after, Michael was diagnosed with terminal cancer. The news hit like a tidal wave, but Michael was determined to face it head-on. We tried our best to live day to day, as normally as possible, but the weight of his illness was always there, hanging over us. One evening, shortly after his diagnosis, Emily was in her room upstairs, playing with Bella, when we suddenly heard the dog barking furiously. A moment later, Emily called down, "Come up here, I'm scared." Without thinking, I rushed up the stairs. There in the corner where Bella was barking was a shadowy figure, a tall, dark shape of a man, almost cloud-like. It had the form of a person, head, torso, arms, and legs, but no clear features. Strangely, I didn't feel fear or panic. Instead, I felt an odd sense of calm, as if I already knew who, or what, it was. It suddenly struck me. This was Jake. He had come back to watch over Michael. I whispered softly, "Jake, I know you're here, and I know you're looking out for Michael, but you're scaring Emily." The moment I spoke, Bella stopped barking and began wagging her tail, her earlier fear completely gone. Slowly, the figure moved toward the door, Bella trotting behind it, still wagging her tail. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. Emily and I were both convinced it was Jake, but Michael, understandably, was skeptical. He hadn't seen anything and wasn't ready to believe. As the holidays approached, the house took on a bittersweet tone. We hung ornaments on the Christmas tree, shimmering glass balls and bright red ribbons. Yet the weight of Michael's diagnosis was never far from our minds. During this time, we received the devastating news that the cancer was beyond treatment. The doctors said there was nothing left they could do, yet we clung to small moments of joy when we could. One morning, as we sat in the living room sipping tea, Michael's exhaustion was evident. He looked like he had the weight of the world on his shoulders. After a long silence, he finally spoke, his voice shaking, "I'm scared to die. How will I know where to go, or what to do?" I paused, unsure of how to ease his fears, but then I said, "If you're unsure, just call out to Jake. I'm sure he'll be there to help you." Michael shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "I don't believe in ghosts or spirits," he said softly, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. In that moment, I silently prayed, "Jake, if you can hear me, please, show him a sign." What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. One of the red velvet ribbons on the Christmas tree, the one hanging closest to us, began to sway. Michael and I watched, frozen in place, as it gently lifted off the branch, floated a few inches to the side, and hung in midair for what seemed like an eternity. Then, just as slowly, it drifted down to the floor. Michael stared at me, wide-eyed. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. He jumped up, checking the windows and doors, even checking the fan. Everything was locked and closed, yet there was no explanation. I couldn't help but laugh. "See?" I said with a smile. "How do you explain that?" From then on, we joked that Jake was playing little tricks around the house. It brought comfort to know that Michael wasn't alone, that someone, even beyond death, was looking out for him. By spring, Michael's health had deteriorated, and he was placed in hospice care. On the day of his 38th birthday, he managed a weak smile as we celebrated, though it was clear his time was running out. A month later, with his brother, Paul, at his side, Michael passed away. What Paul witnessed in those final moments still gives me peace. As Michael lay in his bed, he suddenly sat up, smiled, and raised his hand as if to give someone a high five, someone only he could see. He then lay back down, relaxed, and passed away quietly. There was a sense of calm in the room, as though he had found peace. To this day, I believe Jake was there, guiding Michael to the other side when he needed it most. Their bond, even beyond the grave, gave us all a sense of comfort during a time of profound loss. When I was 14, I lived with my dad and older brother in a small, temporary apartment in Pine Lake, a quiet little town surrounded by thick woods. It wasn't a great situation. My dad worked double shifts, mostly at night, and my brother, being a high school senior, was rarely home. That left me alone most of the time. Even though it was supposed to be my home, I hated being there by myself. The place felt off. There was something about it that made me uneasy. Most days I would go to my aunt and uncle's apartment downstairs. They lived in the same building and never minded me hanging around. But one day, something didn't feel right. It all started when I came home from school. My brother, who usually stopped by at least once, didn't show up. By evening, I decided to visit my aunt and uncle. Their door, which was always unlocked, was shut tight. I knocked, but no one answered. Frustrated, I went back upstairs. That's when I noticed the TV and Xbox in the living room were turned off. I hadn't touched them. It was like the entire apartment had been frozen in time. Feeling uneasy, I grabbed a snack and went to my room with my iPad. After turning off all the lights and locking the doors, something my dad insisted on because of the electric bill, I settled into bed to watch some videos. But sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, restless, as if something was lurking nearby. Eventually, I drifted off, only to wake up in the most terrifying way imaginable. I found myself halfway out of my bedroom window, 4 stories up. The screen had been popped out, and my upper body was hanging out into the open air. My heart raced as I carefully pulled myself back inside. The room was silent. No one was there. Terrified, I put the screen back in and locked the window. My mind was racing. How had this happened? Had I gotten up in my sleep? Had someone, or something, tried to pull me out? The thought that something had been watching me, waiting, sent chills down my spine. I wanted to call my dad, but I didn't. I was afraid he'd think I was trying to hurt myself, especially since I'd recently been diagnosed with anxiety. That year had been tough, and while I'd had some dark thoughts, I didn't truly want to die. I just couldn't shake the feeling that something in that apartment was drawing me toward the window. Instead, I stayed awake until morning, my nerves on edge, waiting for my dad to come home from his shift. When he arrived, I convinced my brother to trade rooms with me since his didn't have a window. He teased me about it, but he agreed. We moved out not long after. My dad told us we were relocating to a small town a few hours away, which seemed sudden. Years later, my brother casually mentioned that our dad had always thought the apartment was haunted. My brother laughed it off, being a skeptic, but to me, it made sense. That one night had stayed with me all these years, small as it might seem to others. I knew it wasn't just my imagination. There was something in that apartment, something watching, waiting to make its presence known. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. At just 19, I left my small town in rural Pennsylvania to pursue a dream, working on cruise ships. The experience took me to incredible places, and I was earning a living. But after a few years, I returned home, still searching for something more. That's when I met a guy from Canada. Not long after, I found myself packing up and moving halfway across the world to start a new life in Vancouver. Life in Canada wasn't as easy as I'd imagined. Money was tight, and I found myself missing home more than I expected. 2 years into this new chapter, I got the kind of news no one ever wants to hear. My grandfather, my pop-pop, was very ill. I've been getting emails from my mom, each one more desperate than the last. His health was deteriorating, and I felt completely powerless, so far away from my family. Then came an unexpected message. He's showing signs of improvement. Still, something deep inside me knew better. People often rally just before they go, I thought. I didn't voice my concern to my mom, but that thought stayed with me. A few days later, my mom called. "You need to come home," she said. She'd managed to arrange a flight for me, and I was booked to leave in a week. Work was reluctant to let me take time off, but I wasn't asking. I was going. I couldn't bear the thought of not saying goodbye. The morning I was due to leave Vancouver, something strange happened. I woke up an hour before my alarm, a strange sense of urgency in the air. As I turned over, I saw a man standing in the corner of my room. He was smiling at me, and though I didn't recognize him at first, I realized it was someone I'd seen in old family photos, an impossibly young version of my pop-pop. At the time, I didn't think much of it and focused on my long journey back home. The trip from Vancouver to rural Pennsylvania took 36 hours, a journey that felt longer than I ever imagined. By the time I boarded my flight in Los Angeles, surrounded by people speaking with an Aussie accent and hearing the familiar strains of "I Still Call Australia Home" playing over the speakers, I felt like an emotional wreck. Tears streamed down my face, knowing I was finally going back home. The journey continued with a layover in Melbourne before landing in Philadelphia and then taking the long drive back to my hometown. When I arrived at the airport, my parents were waiting for me. My only thought was to get to the hospital to see my pop-pop. But instead of going straight there, they insisted on taking me home first. I argued, growing more anxious by the second, but they wouldn't budge. And then it hit me. There was only one reason they would delay. My heart sank, and I asked, "Has he passed?" My mom looked at me, her eyes soft with sorrow. "Yes, honey. I'm so sorry, but he's gone." It turned out my pop-pop had passed away the same morning I'd left Vancouver. My mom hadn't told me, not wanting me to carry that weight during my journey. It decided to keep it quiet, no posts, no messages, until I was safely back. And then I remembered the man in my room. I told my mom about seeing him, how he'd smiled at me, and how impossibly young he looked. She listened, her eyes wide with understanding. We both knew it was him. He had come to say goodbye in his own way. Though I never made it to the hospital in time, I realized that moment was his way of being with me, of ensuring I'd be able to say goodbye. Every grandchild had come back home at some point except for me. Maybe he couldn't leave without making sure I was there, even if it was just in spirit. When I was around 4 or 5 years old, I had an experience that stayed with me my whole life. It was early summer, just after sunrise, and I was lying in bed, awake. Suddenly, a wave of fear washed over me, something unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't the usual fear of the dark or imaginary monsters under the bed. No, this was something deeper, something that told me without a doubt that I wasn't alone in my room. I couldn't see anyone, but I knew. I could feel the presence there. Terrified, I pulled the blanket over my head, thinking it would keep me safe, like I'd always been told. But I was wrong. I felt it. Cold fingers brush against my head, my side, even my foot. The touches weren't gentle. Whatever it was seemed to be trying to pull the blanket off me. I froze in place, paralyzed by fear, unable to call out for help. It wasn't until the fear became unbearable that I finally screamed for my parents. My dad rushed into the room. I told him what had happened, but he insisted no one was there. I knew better. I was wide awake, and the memory stuck with me, even though my mom tried to comfort me. She gave me a knowing look, one I didn't fully understand until years later. She, too, had experienced things she couldn't explain, things like seeing her parents and brother, both long past. Yet I never connected the dots back then. 10 years passed, and we had moved to a new house. It was summer again, and once again, the early morning hours brought that strange feeling, like a pull, a sense that something wasn't right. It wasn't fear this time, but an intense knowing that I had to get up. It reminded me of that day when I was 5. I shared a room with my younger brother, and I woke him up, urging him to get out of bed. At first, he groggily protested, but after a bit of convincing, we quietly slipped out of our bedroom. We pressed our backs to the wall as we tiptoed down the hallway, drawn toward the kitchen. I couldn't explain it, but I knew someone, or something, was there. When we reached the edge of the kitchen, I stopped and peeked around the corner. There she was, a woman dressed in a long black dress, standing near the back door, looking right at me. Her expression was warm, almost friendly, but it was undeniably her, the same presence I had felt all those years ago. I turned to my brother and pointed toward her. He peeked around the corner, his face turning white as he whispered, "Who is that?" I looked again. She was still there, her eyes locked on mine. But this time, I felt no fear. Somehow, I knew she wasn't there to harm me. My brother panicked and ran straight into our parents' room. I looked back at the woman one last time, and she was still standing there, smiling gently. But before I could turn away, my dad came down the hallway, asking what was going on. As soon as he reached the kitchen, she vanished, just disappeared without a trace. Later that day, my mom showed me an old photograph. It was of her mother, my grandmother, who had passed away a month after I was born. I had never met her, and I had never seen a picture of her before. But it was her, the woman from the kitchen. My mom asked me to describe what she was wearing, and when I did, tears welled up in her eyes. She told me it was the same dress her mother had been buried in. Even now, all these years later, the memory is as clear as ever. It wasn't a dream or something my imagination made up. I know she was there, both when I was a little kid and that morning in the kitchen. Maybe she was just watching over me, making sure I knew I wasn't alone. When I was 24, I moved to a small coastal town in Maine, seeking a fresh start and a sense of adventure. Growing up in Australia, with its sprawling landscapes and wide open spaces, I had grown restless in the cramped apartments of the city. I dreamed of a place where I could have a backyard, where the house would be surrounded by nature. So when I found a quaint 102-year-old farmhouse overlooking a foggy bay, it felt like I had stepped into a storybook. The house had a rich history, originally part of a large family estate. Only one of the original owner's sons still lived nearby, in a house tucked at the end of a long, winding driveway. It seemed perfect. At least, that's what I thought. Not long after we moved in, I was unpacking in an upstairs room we'd planned to keep off limits for a while. The room had a slanted ceiling, and the closet took up much of the space, with shelves that lined the walls. Behind them was a small crawl space. I shoved our suitcases behind the shelves, closed the doors, and turned to pull the light chain. That's when I heard the faint pop of the closet's magnetic locks snapping open, followed by the creak of the doors pulling ajar. I froze. The suitcases had moved. They were now neatly aligned in front of the shelves, as if they had pushed the doors open themselves. My heart raced as I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. My partner brushed it off, attributing it to the old house settling. I wanted to believe that too, but something about it didn't sit right. For a while, things settled into a quiet routine. Occasionally, I'd see something shift out of the corner of my eye, but I'd chalk it up to being tired or a trick of the light. Then, one afternoon, while I was vacuuming the living room before heading out, I saw my partner walk behind me toward the bathroom. A moment later, I heard the shower running. Assuming he was getting ready, I finished up and went to check on him. But the bathroom was empty. The shower was off, but the mirror was fogged as though someone had been standing in there just moments ago. Bewildered, I found him in the other room with the dog, insisting he hadn't left the spot. That's when the strange occurrences began to intensify. Objects would vanish from their usual places, only to reappear later, exactly where I'd left them. One day, I opened the microwave to find melted ice cream dripping from a carton that had somehow ended up inside. My partner didn't see what I was concerned about, but I knew there was more to it. One afternoon, while chatting with our neighbor, who was the son of the original owner, I mentioned how much we loved the house. He smiled, as though he knew something we didn't. Then he casually asked, "Have you met my mother?" I assumed she lived nearby, so I said no, and he simply replied, "Oh, you will." That's when we learned the truth. His mother, Mrs. Parker, had passed away in that very house. She had been packing for a cruise in that same upstairs room when she passed away peacefully in her sleep. Suddenly, everything started to make sense. The suitcases, the sounds, the objects going missing. It was her lingering in the house. From that day on, I felt a quiet connection with her presence. She wasn't malicious. If anything, it seemed like she was just watching over the house she had loved so much. One day, while standing in that very room, I felt her nearby and gently said, "Hello, Mrs. Parker. I hope you're at peace today." After that, we coexisted quietly. She never caused us harm, and I believed that when she was ready, she'd finally move on. After all, it had been her home long before we arrived. It all started in March 2016. At the time, I was renting a room in a house owned by a woman named Sarah. She had opened her home to me during a tough chapter in my life, but it was clear from the start that it was only temporary. A few weeks before, Sarah had mentioned that she was planning to sell the house, so I would need to find a new place soon. She casually mentioned that her son had passed away in the house, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, I had my own troubles to deal with. During the last week of March, Sarah was away most of the time, leaving me alone to pack up my things. One Tuesday night, around 11:30 p.m., I headed to bed in the small loft room on the top floor. I was wide awake, unable to sleep, and I lay there with the light on, thinking about my upcoming move to a shared rooming house. That's when I felt something shift in the air. It was as though an invisible force had drawn my attention to the wall on my right. Slowly, I turned my head, following whatever it was as it seemed to hover above me, just out of sight. It paused for a moment above my head, and I felt a cool, refreshing breeze, like the sensation of snowflakes falling on my face. Then it drifted to the left side of the bed, where it stopped. I stared at the spot, my heart racing, but there was no real fear, just a quiet curiosity. Then I heard it. A voice, clear and sweet, like the voice of a young teenage girl. She spoke just one word, "sweet." It was as if she were standing right beside me, and just as quickly as the sensation came, it was gone. I didn't feel scared. In fact, I felt calm, almost as if I were being visited by a friend. When I moved into my new place in April, life took a strange turn. I developed an infection in my right arm that wouldn't heal due to poor circulation. By October, I had to have part of my arm amputated. It was a difficult time, but I now wear a prosthetic arm that looks so lifelike that most people don't even realize it's not my real arm. And that's when the strange activity started again. Since Christmas 2017, whenever I sleep on my right side, I position my prosthetic arm against the wall. As I begin to drift off to sleep, I can feel it move. The spirit seems to gently lift my arm and let it fall back against the wall with a soft thud. Sometimes it's gentle, but other times it's more forceful, with my arm hitting the wall with a loud bang. On some nights, I feel it shift my arm slightly, as if it's testing the movement. It's almost playful. At first, I was startled, but quickly realized there was no fear in it, only calm curiosity. Could this be the same spirit that spoke to me in the loft? Occasionally, I'll smell a faint scent of perfume in the air, as if she's nearby, watching over me. One night, I decided to try to communicate. I picked up a pen with my good hand and placed it on a piece of paper, hoping for some sign, some message. The pen didn't move, but the paper shifted slightly, as if guided by an unseen hand. There have been nights when I've felt gentle touches on my leg or even through my clothes. On some occasions, I've even felt the bed shift slightly beneath me, as though someone were settling next to me. The spirit also seems to have an affinity for my electronics. I found the home theater system turning on and off at random. or the inputs changing without me touching anything. Despite all this, I've never once felt threatened. Instead, it feels more like a quiet companionship, a presence that means no harm. The activity slowed down during the summer months but picked up again in October. I'm still not sure why she's still with me or what she wants, but I've come to accept her presence as part of my life. I don't mind it. In fact, it's almost comforting. What do you think? Could there be more to this story than I realized? I still remember the first time it happened in our new home, and it still continues to haunt us to this day, even for those who haven't heard the story. At first, it started small, footsteps in the night, strange thuds, and the unsettling sound of something dragging along the floor. Living out in the middle of nowhere, you get used to odd sounds, especially at night. But then, things took a darker turn. It all started the night we moved in. My mom had gone out to grab pizza, leaving me alone in the house to unpack. I had just hooked up the VCR and was trying to relax on the couch with a movie when it happened. From down the hallway, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open, followed by the heavy echo of 3 footsteps. Then came the sound of something running, fast and loud, down the hallway. I jumped off the couch, heart racing, and crouched behind the ottoman, frozen in fear. The air grew cold, and it felt like the room was closing in around me. I watched in disbelief as the carpet shifted, as though invisible feet were circling the room, moving toward the kitchen and back down the hall. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the door creaked shut. I didn't move until I saw the headlights of my mom's car pulling into the driveway. She and my brother came inside, pizza boxes in hand, and I tried to explain what had just happened. Tears filled my eyes as I told them, but my mom dismissed it, saying it was just my imagination or an attempt to scare my brother. Feeling frustrated and scared, I retreated to my room. Though my mind wouldn't let go of the unease I felt, I tried to distract myself. Hours passed as I played video games, but by 3 a.m., exhaustion set in. I turned everything off and crawled into bed, hoping for rest. I thought I'd be safe in my sleep, but it was the worst decision I could have made. I awoke suddenly, my heart pounding. My door, which I always kept shut, was slightly ajar. Confused, I got up and walked down the hall. The faint glow of static from the TV illuminated the space. As I neared the living room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. It looked like my brother, lying on the floor, his body moving in slow, figure-8 motions. "Hey," I called softly. But as soon as I spoke, the figure froze. Slowly, it rose, revealing a gaunt, gray face and blank, white eyes. It stared at me for a moment before letting out a piercing scream, a sound so loud that the TV blared suddenly at full volume. In a panic, I stumbled over the ottoman and hit the floor, but as my back hit the ground, I found myself back in bed, staring at the ceiling. My door was still ajar. I tried to convince myself it had been a nightmare, but as I rolled to get out of bed, something heavy leaped onto my chest, pinning me down. I gasped for air and jolted awake once again. This time, my door was firmly closed, and I didn't move until the first light of day peeked through the curtains. The next morning, my mom noticed how distressed I looked. Over tea, she insisted I tell her what had happened. Trembling, I recounted everything, and to my surprise, she told me she experienced similar things. So had my brother. Whatever this entity was, it had been haunting them too. We don't speak about it to guests, but oddly, they often mention having the same dream. They describe the gray-faced figure with unsettling accuracy. Strange things continue to happen. Noises in the night, shadows flickering just out of sight, and once, the entire house shook after someone jokingly suggested cleansing it. We later found out that 3 people had died on the property, with the last owner taking his own life after a deep and tragic heartbreak. I still don't know what this entity is or how to protect my family from it, but I do know that its presence is real, and it's never gone away. This story comes from the experiences shared by my aunt, my uncle, my mother, and my grandmother, all of whom lived together in a small townhouse in a quiet town outside of Chicago, Illinois, back in 1999, the year I was born. My family, originally from Mexico, is deeply rooted in Catholic tradition, and we had lived in this townhouse for several years without any strange happenings, until I was born. The townhouse was modest, with just 4 bedrooms. My mom and I shared a room. My crib was squeezed into one corner, with her single bed on the other side, leaving barely any room for anything else. My mom was 24 years old at the time, raising me with help from my tita, my grandmother, a nurse, as well as my aunt and uncle, who were both still in school. The first month after I was born was typical: sleepless nights, frequent feedings, and the usual newborn chaos. But things began to change as I entered my second month. That's when she appeared. It started on an otherwise uneventful night. My tita had just come home late from her shift at the hospital, only to find the house in disarray. I was screaming uncontrollably, and everyone else was awake, trying to calm me down. My tita, being used to babies, took charge and managed to settle me just enough to put me in my crib and close the door. But by 2 a.m., the house was awake again, as my cries echoed throughout the walls. When my tita went to check on me, she froze. Through the slightly open door, she saw a woman in a long black dress, bent over my crib. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. For a moment, my tita stood there, shocked, unable to process what she was seeing: a stranger standing over her granddaughter. But as the reality of the situation sank in, she flung open the door and turned on the light. The room was empty, except for me, crying in my crib. That was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, the lady in black became a constant presence in the house. At first, she appeared only at night, but soon she was seen during the day as well. Everyone in the house saw her: my mom, my aunt, my uncle, though she seemed to focus on me. Sometimes she was standing over my crib or sitting silently in the rocking chair beside it. On rare occasions, she would wander into other rooms, especially when I napped in the living room. There was one moment that shook my family to their core. My tita walked into my room and found the lady in black stretching out her arms toward me, as if she were about to pick me up. But just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. While the spirit never seemed malicious, this felt far too close for comfort. The unease in our family grew. My tita, who had dealt with the supernatural back in Mexico, had never encountered anything like this, a spirit so persistent, so focused on one individual. Fearing that something darker might be at play, my family decided to move. Officially, it was because we were renting and had found an opportunity to buy a nearby house, but quietly, we all believed the real reason was to escape the lady in black. After we moved, the activity ceased. We never saw her again, and life returned to normal. But the townhouse we left behind seemed to retain its secrets. For years, the for sale sign stood outside that house, rotating between owners who never seemed to stay long. Even now, I think back to those days and wonder, who was the lady in black? What was her purpose, and why was she so focused on me? While I'll never have those answers, I do feel thankful that, for my family at least, her chapter closed when we left that house. This story takes me back to a time when my husband was working far away. He was part of a construction crew stationed in a small town, about 4 hours from where we lived. To cut costs, the crew rented an old farmhouse, an eerie 2-story home that was both beautiful and unsettling, with a history that felt like it was hanging in the air. It had high ceilings, a small balcony, and the kind of atmosphere that made you feel like something was just watching. My husband chose the bedroom off the kitchen. It was small, with no windows, and from the moment I stepped inside, something about it didn't sit right. The walls had strange features, including a weirdly sealed-off space that looked like a crawl space. Above the door, there was a quartz crystal tied with a ribbon. It was something my husband had never noticed before. I almost asked him to take it down, but stopped myself. Instead, I told him it might be good to leave it there. Quartz crystals are said to absorb negative energy and protect against spirits. But when I looked closely at this one, it was completely clouded over. It was as though it had already absorbed all the bad energy this house had to offer. Curious, I decided to clean the crystal. I placed it in salt water and let it sit in the sunlight. Hours later, it was clear again, but when I placed it back above the door, it clouded over once more, as though the house itself was still holding on to something dark. I often visited while my husband was at work, spending long hours alone. I'd bake, clean, and try to keep myself busy until he came home. That's when things started getting strange. I'd hear footsteps above me, furniture moving around, and the unmistakable sound of a ball bouncing across the floor. At first, my husband thought it was just the furnace, but the sounds never stopped, not even in the heat of summer. One night after a long day of work, the crew sat around the dinner table, sharing their own strange experiences. One of the quieter, more serious men stunned us all when he said, "The house is haunted by a dog." At first, we laughed it off, but he wasn't joking. He described hearing panting and whining in the dead of night, followed by the feeling of something lying at the foot of his bed. Sometimes, he'd feel dog paws draped across his legs or a phantom tongue licking his hand. He even heard a ball bouncing, just like I did, but when he looked, there was nothing there. One by one, the other crew members shared their own encounters. They'd heard footsteps, seen furniture move by itself, and found items that had disappeared only to turn up in odd places. They all agreed on one thing: there was something unexplainable about that house. As the project wrapped up and the homeowner began showing the place to potential buyers, I had an experience I'll never forget. One morning, I woke to what sounded like voices outside. Thinking someone was touring the house, I tried to get up to close the door and dress, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, yet my mind was wide awake. The voices shifted. One moment they were outside, then beside me, then upstairs, all within seconds. As I lay there frozen, dark figures began to form in the room. I squeezed my eyes shut, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. Then a heavy weight pressed down on my chest, and I felt a hand wrap around my throat. It was as if I were being held underwater, struggling to breathe. Just as I thought I was going to suffocate, the presence suddenly vanished. I shot up, gasping for air. Terrified, I ran from the house and refused to return until my husband came home. I never really learned much about the house's history, but the locals knew. They all agreed there was something wrong with that place. It was haunted. Even now, I believe the strange experiences I had in that house triggered my sleep paralysis. Many people who've had sleep paralysis also report paranormal activity leading up to the event. I was pregnant at the time, and that made the experience even more frightening, not just for myself, but for my unborn son. What do you think? Could sleep paralysis be linked to the paranormal? Have you ever experienced something similar? After finishing my degree, I took a teaching job in a small town in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. The town had a population of only 95 people, so housing options were sparse. There were only 2 places available for rent. The first was a simple, modest basement apartment. The second was an old, worn-down house at the edge of town that made me feel uneasy just by looking at it. At first glance, I wanted to turn around and leave, but I brushed off my feelings, telling myself I was being overly cautious. Since my boyfriend, Mike, was planning to move in with me, I figured a house would be better than the basement apartment. The owner, a kindly older woman, offered to show me around. As we walked through the creaking house, she spoke nostalgically about its past. She mentioned that her uncle had lived there for many years, and how he'd always spoken highly of the area. But as she spoke, a strange, gnawing discomfort settled in my chest. I couldn't shake the eerie sensation that I was being watched. The house's layout was simple but peculiar. You entered through a small kitchen, which opened into a narrow hallway that led to a tiny living room. To the right were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. From the front door, you could see straight through to the other side of the house. There was also an attic above and a basement beneath the living room. The kitchen and entryway had been added at a later date, which gave the house an uneven, unsettling feel. The basement was a basic concrete room with a dirt floor and an old stone well at its center, covered by a massive round stone. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Then she led me to the attic. The staircase was steep and narrow, and she told me to go up alone. The attic was more like a cramped crawl space, with a low ceiling and a floor covered in jagged stones. The moment I stuck my head through the hatch, I was overcome with an intense sense of dread. Something inside me screamed, "Get out now!" I quickly climbed back down, but the woman insisted I give it another try. I refused and asked to move on. When the tour was over, I thanked her, saying I'd think about it. But as I drove away, I glanced back at the house. In the attic window, I saw a man's face staring at me. His gaze was cold, intense, and unsettling. Needless to say, I opted for the basement apartment. A few days later, my new principal, Mrs. Hayes, asked me where I'd decided to live. When I mentioned the basement, she let out a long, relieved sigh. "Good," she said. "I didn't want to scare you, but that house is haunted." She went on to tell me the grim history of the house. Her uncle had indeed lived there, but his life had been tragic. After a violent argument, he chased his wife out of the house with a shotgun and tragically shot her. He then returned and took his own life in the very home that now stood before me. The house had since developed a dark reputation. Previous renters spoke of blood dripping from the ceiling and screams echoing through the night. Many had also seen the man's face in the attic window. It was a house that rarely stayed occupied for long. During my second year in town, a new teacher named John moved into the house. With nowhere else to go, he had no choice but to take it. John never spoke about his experiences in the house, but I had my own unsettling encounter. One evening, just before sunset, I baked a pie and went to visit him to welcome him to the neighborhood. The house was dark, but I could see the flicker of a TV screen from the living room. The front door was ajar, so I knocked and called out his name. There was no answer. Then I saw something move at the far end of the hallway. At first, I thought it was just fabric shifting near the bedroom door, but then a figure, its head, peeked out from behind the door frame before vanishing quickly. Assuming it was John, I called his name again and stepped inside. That's when a figure emerged from the bedroom fully. It was a man-shaped shadow, holding a shotgun. I couldn't make out any features, but the gun was unmistakable. Frozen in place, I dropped the pie and bolted from the house as fast as I could. When I reached my house, I locked the door behind me and collapsed in tears, too shaken to explain what had happened to Mike. Later, John found the pie smashed outside his door. He was confused and asked around about it. I found out he hadn't been home at all that night. I'd seen the shadow while he was still at the school. To avoid telling the truth, I lied and said I'd been startled by a spider. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. But I do know one thing. I'll never set foot in it again. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The farmhouse I grew up in wasn't like any ordinary home. From the moment I moved in as a child, strange things began to happen, subtle at first, like whispers on the wind that I couldn't quite understand. It started with the little things, objects that would disappear from their usual spots, only to show up in the most unusual places. One afternoon after school, I dropped my bag on the kitchen table as I always did. I went to change for work, and when I returned, my bag was gone. I searched everywhere, my bedroom, the living room, even under the couch cushions. Frustrated, I finally decided to check my parents' room, even though I was never allowed in there. To my surprise, my bag was sitting neatly on their bed, as if someone had placed it there carefully. As time went on, the strange occurrences only became more intense. At night, I could hear the kitchen cupboards opening and closing, even though everyone was asleep. Some nights, I'd hear the unmistakable sound of the garage door creaking open, even though we locked it hours earlier. But the most disturbing of all was the doorbell. On nights when I was home alone, it would ring out of nowhere. I'd rush to the door, only to find no one there. No footprints in the snow, no trace of anyone ever being near. My mom always dismissed my experiences. She chalked it up to an overactive imagination or simply coincidences. But one day, while I was telling my sister about it, my mom asked me, "If this house is haunted, who do you think is haunting it?" I wasn't sure why, but before I could think, I blurted out an answer that still sends chills down my spine. "It's an older man, angry, and his 6-year-old son." I couldn't explain why I said it. It felt as though the words were not my own, as if someone else was speaking through me. A week later, my mom came home with a strange story. A woman had approached her at work, saying she was part of a survey team mapping unmarked graves in the area. She revealed that there were 2 unmarked graves on our property, right next to the house. When my mom asked who they belonged to, the woman answered that they were the graves of a 42-year-old man and his 6-year-old son, who had both died of scarlet fever. That's when my mom believed me. Years passed, and I eventually moved away, but the house's eerie presence never really left me. On one visit home, my husband and I stayed overnight in the downstairs bedroom. That night, as I lay awake in bed, trying to drift off, I noticed something odd in the corner of the room. A faint white mist hovered in the air, almost like smoke but too thick to be from anything natural. I watched it for what seemed like forever, my heart pounding, as it slowly began to float toward me. It stopped just beside me, inches away. Fear took over, and I rolled over, clinging to my husband's back. I shut my eyes, praying it would go away. But then, I felt a soft tug on my ponytail. It wasn't violent, just a gentle pull, almost playful. Tears welled up in my eyes as I whispered, "Please stop." The tugging ceased instantly, and my hair fell flat against the pillow. I let out a shaky breath, thinking it was over. But then came something else, a poke. It didn't feel solid, more like a finger pressing lightly into my shoulder. It was just a sensation, almost like the soft circles of someone tracing the lines of my tattoo. It wasn't painful, but it unsettled me deeply. My body shook as I woke my husband, crying out to him. He mumbled in his sleep and rolled over, oblivious. When I finally gathered the courage to look around, the mist was gone. The next morning, I shared my experience with my sister. As I told her about the strange poke on my shoulder, her expression shifted. She grew quiet and asked, "Where exactly did you feel it?" I pointed to my right shoulder. She stepped closer and then said, "You need to see this. Go look in the mirror." I rushed to the mirror, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Surrounding my tattoo were small, circular bruises, right where I had felt the poking. After that night, I refused to sleep in that bedroom again when I visited. Some things, I realized, are better left undisturbed. When I was about 2 or 3 years old, my parents decided to leave the city behind and move out to a piece of land my grandparents owned. They were farmers, and their land was tucked away in the quiet hills of Pine Ridge, a small town that seemed to be frozen in time. This place would become our home, but from the very start, something felt off. Our house sat just off a main road, and the backyard stretched for acres, surrounded by tall, looming trees. To a little kid like me, it was a magical kingdom. There were 2 paths that split off from the main road. One path led to my grandpa's workshop, a weathered old barn where he kept his tractors and farming tools. There was a small office attached to the barn, and in the cold months, we kept my dog and 2 cats there to stay warm. Beyond the shop was a wide, empty field that would sometimes grow corn or wheat, depending on the season. The second path led up a small, rolling hill to our house, which was framed by thick trees on all sides. On one side of the house sat an old, rusted truck. This truck was important, and I'll get back to it. Behind our house, there was a vast, open field scattered with crumbling outbuildings, and more clusters of trees that seemed to keep their distance from the house. Not long after we settled in, I began to find small stone arrowheads and grinding tools scattered around the property. Even as a child, I had the odd feeling that the land had once belonged to someone else, maybe an old Native American settlement, but I never really looked into it. I should have. Around the same time, I started having recurring dreams. They didn't happen every night, but when they did, they were always the same. In these dreams, I would find myself standing at the edge of an old Native American village. It was alive with movement, women cooking, children playing. But then, in an instant, everything would go up in flames. People screamed, children cried, and amidst the chaos stood a man. He was dressed in what looked like old cowboy attire, but his face was a void, nothing but darkness. He would always walk toward me, and just before he said something, I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I told my mom about the dreams, but we couldn't make sense of them. She saged the house, hoping it would ease the strange energy, but nothing changed. Then one day, as I was outside playing with my dog, I saw him, the man from my dreams. He was standing out in the middle of the field near the shop, just watching me. A chill ran through me, a sense of pure malice radiating off him. I ran inside and didn't look back. From that moment on, I couldn't bring myself to set foot in that field again. But the strange events didn't stop there. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of children walking between the trees. There were no other kids for miles. Once I walked past the old truck, the one that hadn't run in years, and to my horror, it suddenly roared to life, the engine sputtering like it was ready to drive off. I had an imaginary friend too, a middle-aged woman who always wore a soft, yellow dress. She looked strikingly familiar, but I never realized until much later that she resembled my dad's mother, who I had never met. Still, none of this compared to what happened one night when I was around 7 or 8. It was late, around 10 p.m., and I was drifting off to sleep. Suddenly, I felt an unbearable weight pressing down on my chest, as if something was sitting on top of me. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The room felt unnaturally dark, even though the hallway lights were on. One corner of my room was pitch black, darker than it should have been. Then I heard it. A voice, deep, menacing, and chilling. It repeated over and over, "Get out! Get out!" I was paralyzed with fear, tears welling up in my eyes. I tried to scream to say, "But I live here. This is my room." But no sound came out. I don't know how, but eventually, I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I told my mom about it. She didn't say much at first, but later, I found out she'd had the house blessed. Thankfully, I never heard that voice again. When Sarah and I decided to move into our new home, we thought we had found the perfect place to begin the next chapter of our lives. The house, though not brand new, was about 50 years old and had been well maintained. It originally belonged to the father of our neighbor, who sold it when he moved into a local retirement community. Afterward, a young family lived here for nearly 15 years before we moved in about a year and a half ago. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal, but as time went on, small, unexplainable things began to happen. For instance, the light fixture in our dining room would flicker and dim, seemingly at random. I assumed it was just an electrical problem, so I checked the wiring, made sure the bulbs were properly installed, and tested the dimmer switch. Everything seemed fine. It was easy to dismiss these events as little quirks of an older house, so we did. But things began to shift after we got our first cat, Shadow. Almost immediately, Shadow started acting differently. Sometimes she would fix her gaze on something invisible, staring into the empty air as if watching something move. Once I found her in the laundry room, her tail puffed up in that unmistakable defensive posture cats get when they're frightened. It wasn't a one-time thing. One evening, I was holding Shadow when the door to the laundry room opened, and she seemed to be tracking something invisible as it moved inside. Then came the first truly baffling event. One evening after work, I went to feed Shadow. Her food dish, which sits elevated off the floor, was perfectly placed inside her water dish. The positioning was so precise, it seemed almost impossible. There was no spillage, and the floor was dry. I asked Sarah if she had moved it earlier in the day by accident, but she was just as confused as I was. Things took a darker turn after that. One morning, I was in the kitchen while Sarah sat in the dining room, having breakfast. Suddenly, I heard a woman's voice clearly say, I don't know. Startled, I turned to Sarah and asked, "What?" But she was mid-bite, chewing cereal, and hadn't said a word. It wasn't the last time I heard that voice. Another night, while brushing my teeth in our ensuite bathroom, I heard someone clearly call my name, Josh. It was so real. I thought Sarah needed me. But when I turned, Sarah was downstairs in the basement, far away from the bathroom. I haven't heard the voice since, but the memory still chills me to the bone. One day, I decided to take some random photos with my camera. In one of them, taken in the dining room, I captured what appeared to be a strange orb floating in the air. I don't usually put much stock in orbs, but it added to the growing list of unsettling occurrences. Then there was the incident with the shower curtain. It happened while I was watching a movie upstairs. Shadow was curled up on the bed, and Sarah was downstairs watching Netflix in the basement. Suddenly, we both heard a loud crash from the basement bathroom. I rushed down, fearing Sarah had fallen, but she was still sitting on the couch, staring at the bathroom in confusion. Inside, the heavy shower curtain had fallen, even though it wasn't wet, and the curtain rod was still securely attached to the wall. This bizarre event happened more than once, always under the same conditions, dry, with no obvious cause. Recently, we adopted a second kitten, Luna, and that's when things really escalated. Both cats now seem particularly fixated on one wall in the laundry room. They'll sit there for hours, staring intensely, sometimes following something across the room with their eyes. I've checked for dust, insects, and any logical explanation, but there's nothing there. The most unsettling thing happened just last night. I was sitting in the dining room, working on my laptop, when the overhead light flickered and dimmed to an eerie orange glow before returning to normal. Sarah came in to chat with me, standing between the dining room and the kitchen, when the lights dimmed again, flickering on and off for several seconds before stabilizing. As the light finally returned to normal, Sarah suddenly flinched. "Well, I feel weird," she said, sounding panicked. She quickly stepped into the other room and explained that she had felt an icy chill pass right through her. The house was a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit, with no windows open or fans running. Eagle Heights School was a lively elementary school until it closed its doors in June 2016. It's a 3-story building, likely built in the 1960s, and now sits abandoned, caught in a strange limbo as it waits for whatever comes next. The city of Asheville purchased the property from the local school district last summer after it shut down due to declining enrollment. While there have been talks of repurposing the building for community use, the most likely outcome now is demolition to make room for more parkland in the area. In the meantime, the building is still maintained, kept warm and secured, but no one really knows what will happen to it. I'm part of the city's maintenance team, and Eagle Heights School is one of the many properties I oversee. I visit it daily to check on the heating, fire, and electrical systems. There's also a constant security presence, as the building has been broken into twice, with all the fire extinguishers discharged on both occasions. The security guards have told me some strange stories about things they've witnessed while on duty. One guard mentioned hearing footsteps in the first-floor hallway near their makeshift operations room. When they investigated, the hallway was empty. Shortly after, the mobile security unit arrived to check on the guard, and the footsteps started up again. Together, the two guards searched the building, walking through all 3 floors in opposite directions. They searched every room and closet, but found no one. This happened again the next day. With all classrooms locked, there were no places left to hide. Another guard reported hearing what sounded like a small choir of girls singing. At first, he thought it might be coming from outside, but it was 1:00 a.m. on a freezing cold winter night, not exactly the time for carolers. He checked both inside and outside the building, but the singing stopped after less than a minute, and he couldn't find any source for it. On another occasion, a guard heard voices, specifically the voices of girls talking, but again, he couldn't figure out where they were coming from. My own experiences have been just as unsettling. One afternoon, I was on the third floor, walking from one mechanical room to another along the school's longest hallway. About 2/3 of the way down, I heard a distinct clicking sound near my right ear, followed by the soft murmur of two male voices whispering. The sound lasted several seconds and stopped me in my tracks. I knew I was alone on that floor, and it felt undeniably otherworldly. Another time, while I was doing mechanical checks, I invited a security guard to join me. I admitted the building gave me the creeps, and he was happy to have company since he'd experienced strange feelings there too. As we reached the landing between the second and third floors, I suddenly felt an intense cold spread across my torso and arms. I started to say, "Do you feel?" But before I could finish, the guard interrupted, saying exactly what I was about to, "Suddenly cold in your torso and arms." We tried walking back and forth to pinpoint the cold spot, but it seemed confined to that landing. When we moved toward the third floor, the warmth returned. When we came back down, the landing felt normal again, warm and humid this time. A few weeks ago, I noticed that a window on the third floor was open. There's no reason for a window to be open, especially since no one has access to the classrooms. I asked all the guards, but they denied ever entering the room. The door to the women's restroom in the lower level has also been a source of strange activity. It's often found open, even after being securely closed. A fellow maintenance worker once mentioned that while flushing the toilets to keep the traps filled, he clearly saw the door close behind him as he left. Yet minutes later, the door was wide open again, with the stopper bent down. This happened repeatedly, so we now leave the door open. Coincidentally, my daughter knows the school's last custodian. When she mentioned to the custodian that I had strange experiences at the building, the custodian immediately asked if I'd had trouble with the restroom door or heard whispering on the third floor. It was eerie how closely their stories mirrored mine. This story took place a few years ago during the summer of 2018. It was a stifling night in a small town called Pine Hollow, just outside of New Orleans, Louisiana. I had been hanging out with some friends at a nearby park, and even though I had a curfew of midnight, I pushed it to around 3 or 4 a.m. I figured my mom would be sound asleep and wouldn't notice how late I was getting home. Walking home at that hour always felt unnervingly quiet. The streets were empty, and there wasn't a single car in sight. To get home, I had to cross Route 15, the main highway that cut through town, and then take a shortcut through a ditch hidden by dense trees. Looking back now, I know it wasn't the smartest decision to venture through that dark stretch of woods by myself at such a late hour. As I trudged through the trees, I turned on the flashlight app on my phone to light the way. That's when something caught my eye. A soft glow reflected off the beam of light. It threw me off guard because nothing in that part of the woods ever reflected light like that. Curious, I stepped closer, thinking it might be some sort of animal or a glimmer of something left behind by other late-night wanderers. But when I got closer, I quickly realized it was something else entirely. What I saw stopped me cold. It wasn't an animal. It was a figure, crouched low in the brush. The way its back was arched felt wrong, like it wasn't meant to bend that way. Its ears were long and pointed, and its entire body seemed to pulse with an eerie glow. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was just an illusion or my tired mind playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. This thing wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. Frozen in place, I couldn't look away. The figure slowly turned its head toward me, and that's when I saw its eyes, bright yellow, glowing and piercing, standing out starkly against the rest of its illuminated body. What made my stomach drop was its face, or rather, the absence of one. There was no mouth, no nose, just a smooth, featureless surface beneath those unnerving eyes, and its long, pointed ears. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 5 or 10 seconds, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't decide what to do. I knew I had 3 choices: turn and run back to the main road, try to sprint past it, or attempt to quietly walk by. Instinctively, I ruled out turning my back. My family had always warned me never to show fear or turn your back on something that might be demonic. Running might provoke it, so I decided to walk past it, not daring to make eye contact. Walking past that thing was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. My legs felt like lead, but I kept walking, keeping my eyes glued to the ground and my breath steady. As soon as I made it to the edge of the woods, I broke into a full sprint, not slowing down until I reached the safety of my house. For weeks after that, I couldn't sleep alone. I stayed in my mom's or my younger sister's room, too afraid to be by myself. Years later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I started searching online to find any similar sightings. The closest thing I found was a creature called the rake, a legendary figure said to stalk the woods and dark corners of the world, with reports stretching back hundreds of years. Could that have been it? The thought still sends a shiver down my spine. When I was a child, my parents, both from working-class backgrounds, decided to buy an old farmhouse in a remote part of rural New York, about an hour's drive from Albany. It was a peaceful area, surrounded by dense woods and rolling hills, but it felt far removed from the busy world. We lived there until I was 6, when my parents divorced, and we moved to the city. My mother often told me that as soon as I could talk, I started mentioning the voices I heard in my room. I used to play by myself in the old, creaky house, and she said I would come running downstairs, asking her about strange words that seemed old-fashioned, even sacrilegious. These things always happened when we were alone, and my mom couldn't make sense of it. After the move to the city, my dad kept the farmhouse for weekends and holidays, and I continued to visit. Nothing strange ever happened to me there after we left, but others had different experiences. My dad's second wife's sister and her husband borrowed the house for a weekend getaway. They later told us about slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs late at night. Both woke up, grabbed flashlights for protection, and waited by the door, but the footsteps stopped just before reaching the top. They didn't want to stay another night and never came back. Years passed, and by 2014, I was in a tough spot, balancing a graduate degree and struggling financially. My daughters and I were offered the chance to move into the same farmhouse, now owned by their grandparents, as a temporary solution. The house, though large and beautiful, was always a bit much for me. Old, with its high ceilings and wide windows. It had the charm of another era, but with it came a feeling that I could never quite shake off. Still, I accepted their offer, hoping it would give us some peace. We moved into their father's old room, the same one my daughter had seen the old lady in years before. I made sure to keep the lights on at night and saged the house multiple times, asking for only good energy to remain. For the first year, nothing unusual happened. But as time passed, the grandparents began visiting more often, and their attitude shifted. They became controlling, using their money to push us around. It became too much to handle, but I stayed, trying to hold it together until the school year ended. Then, in November, the grandmother informed me they planned to stay at the farmhouse for a whole month over Christmas. It didn't sit right with me, but I went along with it. Soon after, I began waking up at exactly 5:55 a.m. to a soft, feminine voice whispering, "Hey." It wasn't normal for me to wake up so early. Usually, I'd sleep until 7 o'clock. This happened often, every few days. When I told my mother about it, she suggested I look into the meaning of 555. I wasn't much into numerology, but I found out it's often associated with change, sometimes even a warning to get out. The voice soon started calling to me at night as well, just as I was drifting off to sleep. One evening, with only one day left of school before the holidays, I decided to take my daughters to visit my mom. I emailed the grandparents to let them know we'd be back by December 23 to celebrate Christmas. But as we drove away, I started getting nasty emails. They accused me of being disrespectful and said they decided to kick us out permanently. Despite all attempts to reason with them, they wouldn't listen. A week later, they sent all our belongings to my mother's house. Now looking back, I can't help but wonder if that voice was trying to warn me. Maybe being thrown out right before Christmas wasn't as bad as it seemed. It felt like a blessing in disguise. If that old farmhouse is haunted, I feel sorry for anyone who has to stay there, especially during the holidays. It was the summer of 2016, a season I'll never forget, as it brought with it one of the most unsettling experiences I've ever had. I've encountered a few strange things over the years, but this particular event still lingers in my mind, leaving me both curious and just a little on edge. If anyone has any thoughts on what might have happened, I'd love to hear them. It all began one blistery afternoon while I was sprawled out on the couch, watching TV. Out of nowhere, I felt it, like someone was watching me. A chill crept over my skin as I turned to my right, toward the window. There, just beyond the glass, was the silhouette of a figure, tall, dark, and vaguely human in shape. I couldn't make out any details, but it was unmistakably staring at me. The shadow was perfectly outlined, its head, shoulders, and torso distinct in the dim light. I stared at it for what seemed like forever, frozen in disbelief, before it slowly shifted sideways and disappeared out of view. The wall that the window was on also had a sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I held my breath, expecting the shadow to pass by the door, but it never came. After a few moments of unease, I decided to investigate. Stepping outside, the backyard was brightly lit by the afternoon sun, with no trees or objects around that could have cast such a peculiar shadow. Standing at the spot where the figure had been, something even stranger caught my attention. The ground outside was lower than the living room floor, by at least the height of my thighs. From that angle, only the head and shoulders of an average-sized person would have been visible through the window, but what I saw had been a full torso. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was nothing, until a few months later, another unnerving event took place. One night I woke up, feeling as though I couldn't move. My body felt like it had been weighed down, heavy and completely immobilized. I've had sleep paralysis before, so I wasn't overly panicked. With all the strength I could muster, I opened my eyes, scanning the room to reassure myself nothing was there. Everything seemed normal, so I tried to settle back to sleep. But just as I was drifting off again, I felt something tugging at my blanket. At first, I thought it was just me being tired, so I tucked the blanket around me tighter, hoping whatever it was would stop. But then, I felt it, a sensation I couldn't ignore. Something was pulling me, dragging me toward the foot of my bed. It wasn't a physical touch, but the sensation was unmistakable. Determined to figure out what was happening, I opened my eyes. What I saw in that moment sent a cold shiver down my spine. The closet at the foot of my bed, the one I always kept closed, was wide open. Inside, I saw 3 shadowy, humanoid figures. They were tall and lanky, with features that reminded me of something dark and twisted from an old horror film. They looked almost like a larger, more solid version of the creature Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, except they were completely black, with no faces or details. One figure was standing at the foot of my bed, clearly the one pulling me. Another stood inside the closet, and the third crouched in the far corner. A faint, unnatural glow emanated from the bottom corner of the closet, and I had this eerie feeling that it led somewhere, like a portal to another world. For what felt like forever, we locked eyes. They didn't seem overtly threatening, but the air was thick with an unsettling energy. Gathering what little courage I had left, I grabbed my Bible from the nightstand. The second I moved, they bolted into the closet, slamming the door shut behind them. That was the last I saw or heard from them, at least for a while. Several months later, another disturbing event unfolded. After taking a shower one evening, I closed the closet doors and hung my towel on the knobs, like I always did. That night, I had a vivid, unsettling dream. In it, a woman with wild, bushy hair and a long, flowing dress appeared to me, offering to take me somewhere, to join her on some kind of journey. The details were fuzzy, but the one thing I remember clearly was the gut feeling that told me I shouldn't go. I politely declined, wanting to know more before I made any decisions. When I woke up, I froze. The woman was standing beside my bed. She was darker than the unlit room itself, like a shadow that had taken form, and eerily similar to the figures I'd seen before. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only watch in horror as she leaned in close to me and whispered, "Well, that's why you have to come with me." She motioned toward the closet, which creaked open ever so slightly. Panic surged through me. I squeezed my eyes shut and began to pray, desperately trying to shake off the terrifying grip of the moment. When I opened my eyes again, I was alone, and the room was still. Hey everyone! I put a lot of effort and heart into creating these videos just for you. If you're enjoying the content, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a quick comment below and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Your support means the world to me, and it keeps me motivated to bring more awesome videos your way. When I was about 6 years old, I had an experience that would shape my understanding of the world in ways I couldn't have imagined. It was early Easter morning, and I was eager to see what the Easter bunny had brought. As I sat up in bed, I froze, staring at the tall figure standing at the foot of my bed, at least 6 feet tall, maybe more. At first, confusion washed over me. Who was this man? What was he doing in my room? He stood there, silent and motionless, just staring at me. We locked eyes for what felt like an eternity before a wave of fear overtook me. I quickly ducked under the covers, my heart racing as the unsettling figure remained at the foot of my bed. That was the first time I saw him, the tall man. As I grew up, his appearances became a part of my life. At first, I was unnerved by him, but eventually, I grew accustomed to his presence. I'd spot him out of the corner of my eye, standing in a doorway or watching me from the shadows of a room. Sometimes, he'd appear just as I woke up in the middle of the night, watching me from the corner. By the time I reached my teenage years, I had stopped being afraid. I had simply accepted him as part of my life. But things began to change when I was 15. One afternoon, I was in my room, sitting in front of my vanity and experimenting with makeup when my mom walked in. She looked at me strangely and asked, "Who are you talking to?" I told her no one. She stared at me for a moment, uneasy, then whispered, "I saw a tall figure standing by the door, watching you." That night, I started to question everything. Was I imagining things? Was I going crazy? But the doubts quickly faded when I realized I wasn't the only one who saw him. A few years later, around the time I was 19 or 20, I moved into an old apartment in the heart of Silver Springs, a town known for its eerie history. But that's a story for another time. My boyfriend and I were living there when my cousin, who's always had a flair for the dramatic, came to visit. She was so spooked that she refused to sleep alone. I didn't mind, so we decided to share the futon in the living room for the night. In the middle of the night, I woke up to her clutching my arm, her grip tight with terror. I turned to her and saw the horror in her wide eyes. She whispered, "He's here again. The tall man. He's standing behind me." I wasn't startled in the slightest. By that point, I had seen him enough times that it didn't faze me anymore. I turned over, pulled the blankets up, and drifted back to sleep, leaving my cousin frozen in fear. The next morning, my boyfriend walked into the kitchen, looking a bit shaken. "Babe, you won't believe this, but that tall man. He was standing in the doorway to our bedroom last night," he said. My cousin was furious with me. She thought someone had broken into our apartment. She had no idea she had just seen a ghost for the first time. Years later, during a family reunion, I reconnected with my mom's side of the family. I shared my experiences with my grandfather, and when I mentioned the tall man, his face immediately changed. He knew exactly who I was talking about. He explained that the tall man was actually my great-great-grandfather, a farmer who lived in the 1930s. My great-grandfather, who had spent much of his childhood with him, described him as a tall, quiet man who always seemed to watch over the family. To my surprise, my grandfather revealed that many of my cousins had seen him too. In fact, he told me that my uncle used to play checkers with him when he was a boy. Learning that the tall man was a protective presence from my family's past brought me a strange sense of comfort and connection. It was heartwarming to know he had been watching over us all along, from somewhere beyond the veil. In the spring of 2009, my family moved into an old Victorian house that had been split into several apartments. The first time I saw the house, I felt an instant connection. It had so much history: tall, arched ceilings, dark, solid oak doors, and intricate woodwork that seemed to tell a story. Stepping inside felt like walking back in time. But from the very first night, something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I thought it was just me adjusting to apartment life, being so close to other people for the first time. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. A couple of months later, I found out I was pregnant with my youngest son. My older son was just 2 at the time. Not long after I became pregnant, my now ex-partner's behavior began to change. He grew increasingly controlling and abusive, isolating me from my friends and family, making it almost impossible for me to leave the apartment. I felt trapped, living in constant fear, unable to escape. At first, I dismissed the strange things that started happening around the apartment. Items out of place, glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye. I told myself it was just stress, but then it got worse. I started seeing flashes of something. A yellow flowered dress. It would appear out of nowhere, just for a second, in any room of the apartment, then vanish. We didn't own anything like that. No yellow, no floral patterns. I couldn't explain it. The house, with its old charm, had its quirks. The solid oak doors, for example, didn't quite fit the frames anymore after the renovation. In our bathroom, there was a gap at the bottom of the door, a good inch or two. The hallway carpet extended into the room. One day, while my ex was at work, I placed my son in his playpen and went to use the bathroom. As I sat there, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate steps coming from the hallway. At first, I thought it was someone upstairs, but then I noticed the carpet moving beneath the door. It was like someone was walking right past me. I froze. Was my ex home early? I called out, but there was no reply. Fear gripped me. I rushed out of the bathroom, half expecting to find my son gone. But there he was, still in his playpen, exactly where I had left him. No one else was there. That moment stayed with me. For months afterward, I couldn't use the bathroom without bringing my son along, too afraid to leave him alone. Then one cold December night, when I was 7 or 8 months pregnant, something happened that I still can't explain. It was a bitterly cold night in northern Michigan, the kind where the air feels sharp and freezing, but inside, our bedroom felt unusually hot and heavy. I tossed and turned, struggling to get comfortable, until I finally lay on my back, trying to relax. That's when I felt it. A cold, deliberate hand pressing against the left side of my stomach. It wasn't like a fleeting touch. I felt each finger, the cold palm, spread out wide. What made it even stranger was the angle. The hand felt as though it came from someone standing beside the bed, reaching down to touch me. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I shot up in bed, looking around, but there was no one there. I asked my ex if he had touched me, even though he had been facing away from me. He scoffed and told me it was probably just the baby kicking, but I knew better. This was my second pregnancy, and what I felt wasn't a kick. It was something else, deliberate, almost protective, but undeniably chilling. When I insisted, he dismissed me as crazy and told me to just go to sleep. But I couldn't sleep, not that night. I curled into a ball, wrapping my arms around my stomach, determined to shield my unborn child from whatever was in that apartment. Looking back, I'm still not sure what was haunting that place. Was it tied to the house's past, or was it drawn to the chaos and fear in my life at that time? I've had my share of strange experiences with the supernatural over the years, but the house my cousin grew up in, located in the small town of Pine Lake, Florida, holds the record for the most consistent and ongoing activity. My aunt and uncle still live there, and to this day, the strange occurrences continue to happen. The most common occurrence in their home is the sound of footsteps. Normally, I'd be skeptical about hearing footsteps as evidence of the paranormal. I've always known that houses creak as they settle, that old floorboards can shift, and that HVAC systems can sometimes create noises that resemble footsteps. But in this house, the footsteps are different. They sound deliberate, like someone is walking through the house with purpose, and they've been heard by multiple people over the years. The house itself is a typical two-story home, with a creaky staircase leading up to the bedrooms, and a back door that opens directly into the kitchen. From the kitchen, you can see into the living room and a narrow hallway that leads to the stairs. If you sit in the living room, directly beneath the stairs, you'll often hear footsteps from above. The sound always starts at the top of the stairs, at the end of the hall where the bedrooms are, and then moves toward the stairs that lead down. It's always a single set of footsteps, and they always stop at the edge of the stairs. When you go to check, there's no one there. I've been hearing those footsteps since I was a kid, and so has everyone else in the family. One summer, while I was watching over their dog, I decided to track these footsteps in more detail. I logged the times I heard them and compared them to when the air conditioning kicked on, just to rule out the house creaking from the airflow, but there was no connection. I also made note of where the dog was, the weather, the time of day, and who was home at the time. None of these factors seemed to align with the footsteps, leaving me with no explanation. Then, not long ago, something strange happened to my aunt. She had just gotten home from work. My uncle was still at work, and my cousin was at school, so the house was empty. After locking the front door, she went downstairs to do laundry. While she was in the basement, she heard the front door open and footsteps moving through the house. Thinking my uncle had come home early, she went upstairs to greet him. But when she got to the front door, she found it slightly ajar, with no one around. As she reached to close it, she heard a voice whisper her name right behind her. She spun around, but the house was still empty. Moments later, my cousin came home, and my aunt realized my uncle's car wasn't even in the driveway. There's also the strange story of objects moving on their own, something that's happened more than once. The first time was when my cousin was alone in her room, watching TV. Suddenly, a bottle of nail polish flew off her dresser, about 6 feet away, and landed right on her bed. Startled, she left the room and called my sister. On another occasion, my aunt was with her when multiple objects from the dresser flew across the room toward them, landing on the bed. None of the objects hit them, but they all traveled the same 6-foot distance before coming to rest on the bed. These are just a few of the many strange occurrences that have happened in that house. The activity is regular, but it's never aggressive. Even when objects are thrown, they don't seem to be aimed with the intent to harm. The footsteps, in particular, feel like the remnants of a past event, always the same pattern, from the bedroom to the top of the stairs, and then nothing. The house was built by my grandparents and father, tucked away in a quiet corner of Pine Lake, a small town nestled in the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. It's a beautiful area, with towering trees and mist-covered hills, yet the house itself feels like it belongs to a different time. 3 stories tall, 4 if you count the dusty attic, and now over 30 years old. Strangely, no one has ever died in the house, which only adds to the mystery of the strange happenings inside. Let me start with a memory, one that feels bittersweet. Over 20 years ago, before my parents' divorce, they made a trip to visit my father's family in Germany. It was there that my mother met my great-grandfather. At the end of their visit, he gifted them an antique grandfather clock, small, about a foot tall, but intricate in design. It hadn't worked for years, but he insisted they take it home. They placed it on the mantel in our family room, never thinking much about it. A few years later, that same clock chimed. Long and deep, it echoed through the stillness of the night. The next morning, we received a call from Germany. My dad's grandfather had passed away in his sleep the night before. I lived in that house until I was 13, when my parents divorced. I moved in with my dad, and eventually into a small apartment nearby that I now call the haunted apartment, as I shared before. When things didn't work out, I moved back into my childhood home with my mom. By then, my older sister and her husband were living there, helping with renovations. It wasn't long before my brother-in-law had his own strange experience. He told me about waking up one night around 2 or 3 a.m., only to find an elderly woman standing beside him, watching him with a peaceful expression. The next morning, we received a call. His grandmother had passed away peacefully in her sleep the same night. It felt like the house was a portal for spirits, a place for them to say their final goodbyes. But not all of them were so gentle. One night, I had trouble falling asleep. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard a piercing scream, like a woman's shriek, right at my ear. I woke up with a jolt and asked my boyfriend, who was lying next to me, if he heard it too. He hadn't. The next morning, before I could even mention it, my mom came to me. "Something strange happened last night," she said. "I woke up around 3 a.m., went to the kitchen for some water, and I heard a dinner party going on." "Was the TV on?" I asked, knowing her hearing wasn't great. "No, the TV was off. That's why it was so strange." For her to hear something so clear, especially when her hearing is so poor, was unsettling. What made it worse was that I'd heard the scream at exactly the same time. Another odd occurrence involved a light bulb. One evening, I was outside on the deck, telling some friends about the strange things that had happened in the house. Things like objects vanishing and reappearing, doors slamming, and even our cats getting locked in rooms. I excused myself to use the bathroom, flipping the light switch as I entered. But instead of the usual bright glow, there was nothing. I thought the bulb had burned out, so I turned on the heater light instead. That's when I noticed the light bulb. It was hanging, partly unscrewed, but still attached to its metal base. It hadn't simply burned out. It had been yanked out of place. I called everyone in, including my mom and a friend who was an electrician. As we stood there, we noticed the door to the laundry room, which was right next to the bathroom, was wide open. That door never stayed open, no matter what. It always closed. "Okay," I said, standing near the door. "If you're here, close this door." Slowly, the door creaked shut on its own. No one had touched it. No one had even moved it. It was enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When I was a child, my younger sister and I found my older sister's old Ouija board. We didn't take it seriously, just using it to ask silly questions like who liked whom. We never tried summoning anything. Over time, the board became damaged, torn, stained, and eventually thrown away. Years later, while living back in the house, I discovered a brand new Ouija board in the basement. It was still in its box, unopened, with instructions. When I asked my mom if she had bought it, her face turned pale. "No, I threw the old one away years ago." None of us admitted to buying it. We burned it in the backyard. After that, the mischievous activity seemed to subside. Over time, we've made peace with the spirits in the house. There's one, a prankster, who enjoys moving things around, opening doors, or even startling our cats. Another, a woman, speaks in a soft, mumbled voice and sometimes opens closet doors. We don't know who they are, and honestly, we don't want to. We've learned to live with them, keeping our distance and not provoking them. They leave us alone for the most part. We believe the land itself may hold a history older than the house, something rooted deep in the earth. In the early 1980s, I worked as a maintenance engineer for a food processing plant in a small town in Ohio. The factory, originally built in the early 1900s, had that old industrial feel, creaky floors and machinery that had seen better days, clanking away in the background as if protesting the passage of time. I spent most of my shifts alone in the boiler room, especially late at night or on weekends when production stopped. The boiler room was warm and cozy, a welcome escape from the cold nights, but the rest of the factory felt strange, dimly lit with shadows cast by the towering machinery. It was the kind of place where a flicker of light could make the walls seem to move. At first, I hated the late hours. My social life took a hit, and I spent more time than I'd like to admit stuck in that factory alone. But I had a couple of friends who would come by now and then to keep me company. One cold night, Around 1 o'clock a.m., my friend Kim showed up with a pizza, and we made our way to the lunchroom in the main building. It felt good to have some company, and the pizza helped lift my spirits. As we ate, chatting and laughing, I noticed something strange. I could hear voices. 2 women, faint but clear, talking somewhere in the building. I tried to ignore it at first, convinced it was just my mind playing tricks on me. After all, I was the only one on shift that night, and the factory was supposed to be empty. I told myself it was probably just the sound of steam or some mechanical noise echoing through the old building. But the voices didn't stop. They kept going, soft but distinct, though I couldn't make out a word. Finally, I turned to Kim. "Do you hear that?" I asked. Kim stopped chewing, his face going pale. "It's definitely 2 women talking," he said, his voice trembling. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We left the pizza behind and set off to find the source of the voices. We followed the sound down the hall toward the milk receiving area, but it shifted, leading us toward the back of the building, near the empty storage area on the 2nd floor. It was like the voices were toying with us, always staying just out of reach. Every time we got closer, they seemed to move farther away, leading us in a weird game of hide and seek. We never managed to make out a single word, but both of us were certain it was in English. After an hour of searching and getting nowhere, we gave up and returned to the lunchroom to finish our pizza. By the time Kim left, the voices had stopped. I went back to my post in the boiler room, feeling uneasy, but nothing else out of the ordinary happened for the rest of the night. 4 weeks later, I found myself back on the night shift, and this time, my friend Scott came by to hang out. We ordered pizza again and settled into the lunchroom, chatting about anything and everything. I hadn't mentioned the previous incident to him, but as we ate, I heard it again. The voices. This time it was 2 men, their murmurs barely audible, drifting through the building. I ignored it at first, refusing to acknowledge the weirdness of it all. But then Scott stopped mid-bite. "Do you hear 2 men talking?" he asked, his voice a mix of confusion and fear. A cold chill ran down my spine. I couldn't deny it anymore. I nodded and explained to Scott what had happened last time. Neither of us was particularly eager to investigate, but we couldn't help ourselves. Once again, we tracked the voices, room to room, floor to floor, but they stayed just out of reach. Each time we got close, they seemed to slip away, like they were trying to make us chase them. The pattern was the same as before, soft, indistinct English, just beyond comprehension. After an hour of following them, we gave up and went back to the pizza. That was the last time I heard those voices. Even when my friends dropped by on later shifts, bringing pizza and keeping me company, the strange conversations never returned. To this day, I still can't explain what we heard or why the voices led us around the building. It felt pointless, like they were just trying to get our attention. But for what? The factory eventually closed down and was torn apart, but every now and then, I catch myself thinking about those voices, wondering if they were tied to the building's history, or if something else, something we'll never understand, was trying to tell us something. Over the years, one of the old firehouses I worked on gained a reputation for being haunted. Whispers about eerie lights that swirled through the empty halls, strange sounds echoing in the night, and the lingering scent of cooking would often drift from the station, even when no one was around. But the most chilling tale was of a woman who was seen walking through the building, her figure vanishing whenever anyone turned to look at her. This firehouse, once filled with life, was decommissioned 2 years ago and locked up tight, its busy halls now drowned in silence. I was there to help close the place down, retrieving any items that could still be of use. One afternoon, while working alone in the garage, I climbed a ladder to reach a storage area when I heard a deep, rumbling sound followed by a loud thud. It repeated, rumble, thud, over and over, sending an icy shiver down my spine. The sounds were coming from the living quarters, but I was the only one supposed to be there. At first, I thought it might be someone breaking in, but the thought of investigating alone felt too unsettling. About 20 minutes later, A coworker arrived, and I told him what had happened. Together, we made our way to the living quarters, but we found nothing. Just as we were about to give up, something caught my attention. A sliding closet door in the dorm room. When I moved it along its track, it made the same rumble and thud I had heard earlier. To test it, I asked my coworker to move the door while I waited in the garage. Sure enough, the sound was identical. A few days later, I told my friend Bill, a firefighter who had worked at the station and had his own stories to tell. Bill, who calls himself a ghost magnet, was intrigued. He had heard unexplained noises from the same closet and believed there was something to it. He suggested we try a table-tipping session, something he thought might help us communicate with whatever was haunting the place. With my supervisor's permission, we gathered one evening at the abandoned station. Bill brought a small card table and a few folding chairs, and I invited a friend who was curious about the whole thing. We set up in the dorm room, close to the haunted closet. With no power in the building, the dim light from our flashlights added to the eerie atmosphere. We placed our fingertips lightly on the table, and within seconds of Bill's invocation, the table began to shake. It started vibrating and rocking slightly, which left me feeling skeptical. I couldn't help but laugh, accusing Bill of moving the table himself, but he insisted it was the spirits at work. He asked a few questions, and to my surprise, the table seemed to respond, shifting in response to his words. When Bill turned on his flashlight, he declared that I was disrupting the session with my negativity and suggested I step away. I reluctantly stepped back, and my friend took my place at the table. I stood behind them, becoming the photographer for the session. In the dim light, I could hear the table moving, knocking against the floor, and chairs scraping as the others reacted to the activity. I snapped photo after photo, even angling the camera underneath the table to look for any sign of trickery. Thunder rumbled outside, and the storm's presence only seemed to add to the ominous feeling in the air. When the session ended, we packed up and headed to a nearby coffee shop. As we sat around, the group excitedly recounted the strange events. They claimed the table even balanced on one leg at times, completely defying logic. I couldn't wait to review the photos I'd taken. When I uploaded them to my computer, I was stunned. Despite my initial doubts, the photos told a different story. There were no signs of manipulation. The participants' fingers were clearly on the table's surface, with no visible effort to lift or push it. No wires, no strings, no tricks. My friend, who had been at the table, described a strange resistance when he tried to press down on it, like something invisible was pushing back. Even now, I can't explain what we experienced that night. The photos, while not definitive proof, are still compelling, capturing something that can't be easily explained. They represent a moment where the line between the natural and the supernatural seemed to vanish, leaving behind an unsettling mystery that I can't shake. We've been living here for about a year now. From the moment I first laid eyes on it, I just knew it was meant to be ours. It wasn't the house's design or layout that drew me in. It was something deeper, an undeniable connection that I couldn't quite explain. But last week, something happened that made me question if there's more to this house than meets the eye. This wasn't the first strange occurrence I'd experienced here, though it was the first I couldn't brush off. The first incident happened when we were still deciding whether to buy the place. I brought my dad over to check it out, and we wandered down to the basement. It was a large, unfinished space, cold and damp, with an old wooden workbench against one wall. That's when my dad stopped dead in his tracks and asked, "Who was that?" Confused, I asked him what he meant, and he said he saw someone peek around the doorframe behind me, only to quickly duck away. I didn't see anyone and knew for sure there was no one else down there, but I checked the room anyway. It was empty, just like the rest of the house. A relic of the man who had built it, his workshop still intact. When I returned to my dad, he wouldn't talk about it, brushing it off like it was nothing. I tried to ignore the strange feeling that lingered. A few days later, he was diagnosed with pneumonia, and I figured his fever might have caused him to imagine things. He recovered fully, and I pushed the whole incident out of my mind. We moved in, and for 6 months, Everything seemed normal. Then, one cold winter evening, I came home early and decided to enjoy the rare quiet of the house. I lit the dining room fireplace and settled at the table to do some work. The dining room is one of my favorite places, spacious with tall ceilings and wood-paneled walls that give it a rustic, comforting feel. As I sat there, something caught my eye. A single dusty boot print, high on the wood paneling, about 10 feet up. It was clear the print was from a heavy work boot, and I assumed it must have been left there by someone who helped install the paneling years ago. But why hadn't I noticed it before? For a week, it became a quirky mystery I pointed out to anyone who came over. Then the following weekend, I grabbed a step ladder to clean it off, but it was gone. I asked my husband if he wiped it away, but he hadn't. I searched the entire wall, but the print had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Life went back to normal until last Saturday. I had bought some new hooks for the bathroom door, and my husband offered to put them up. When I mentioned that the hooks came with drywall anchors, ones that might not be ideal for a door, he shrugged it off, saying they'd work just fine. I left the package on the bathroom counter and went on with my day. A few hours later, I walked into the bathroom and found the hooks still sitting on the counter, alongside a second, older package of drywall anchors. The package was faded and worn, with only 4 out of 6 anchors left inside. I called out to my husband, asking where he found them. "I didn't," he replied. "You did." I was confused, so I asked what he meant. He explained that he'd found the old package in the middle of the upstairs hallway and assumed I had left it there. But I hadn't. I'd never seen that package before in my life. My husband, ever the skeptic, insisted I must have forgotten, and that was the end of it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some coincidence. The old package of anchors felt like a message, like a gift from someone who had lived here before and cared deeply for the house. Maybe it was the former owner, the man who built and poured his heart into this place, reaching out from the past to make sure we didn't make a mistake, ensuring we used the right tools, the right care. Maybe this house has more of a history than I thought. Maybe it's not just the walls that hold memories, but the very air, the very foundation, calling out to us. It was a Wednesday night, and I had just dropped off Sarah at her house. The clock read 2:15 a.m. as I made my way home through the quiet streets of Silver Springs, a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwest. The town was still and peaceful, with hardly any cars on the road. To break the silence, I connected my phone to my car's speakers and played my favorite playlist. The soft music was comforting, making the dark, empty roads feel less isolating. But about 10 minutes into the drive, an unexpected wave of anxiety washed over me. It started off small, but quickly grew into an overwhelming feeling of dread. It was as though someone else was in the car with me. My eyes kept darting to the rear-view mirror, scanning the back seat. It didn't make sense. There was nothing there. Still, the darkness behind me felt oppressive, thicker than the pitch-black night outside. I tried to shake it off, telling myself that I'd be home soon, clinging to the thought of being in my safe, familiar place. But just as that reassurance started to calm me, my music suddenly cut out. In its place, static began to screech through the speakers, loud, jarring, and completely unnatural. I fumbled for my phone, desperately trying to stop the noise, but nothing worked. The static only grew louder and more erratic, as if it were alive, a force beyond my control. Then the voice came. I'll never forget the sound of it. It wasn't one voice. It was many, all speaking in a language I couldn't even begin to recognize. It wasn't English, Spanish, or anything human. The words, if they were words, felt like they were pressing into my mind, filling the car with an unsettling presence that felt so wrong, so unnatural. Panic surged through me as I screamed, my hands shaking as I tried to shut it off. I ripped my phone from the charger, pressed every button, but the voice kept going, relentless. The weight in the car grew unbearable. It was as if something was sitting in the back seat, watching me, waiting. My heart hammered in my chest as I stole another glance at the mirror, half expecting to see a shadow materialize behind me. The air felt thick and suffocating, my breath shallow. I didn't know what to do. Should I pull over, get out, run? But before I could make a decision, everything stopped. The static, the voice, the presence. It all vanished in an instant, leaving me in stunned silence. Only my ragged breathing and the hum of the tires on the road filled the air. But even then, the feeling of being watched remained, heavy and suffocating. I pulled off the road and stopped at the edge of a small forest, my hands shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom. She was the one I always turned to when things felt out of control.